Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 3501, The Primordial Energy Cat. For such a large amount of divine crystals, it would take a long time to extract all the energies in them. However, it wasn't a big deal for the snake goddess. She already had a plan in mind. As the jadeite platform spun, all the divine crystals would be crushed in a certain direction and then release the internal energy. The blue energy that gushed out from the divine crystals flowed towards the center like hundreds of small streams. As they gathered in the center of the platform, they formed an azure river of energy. The produced river of energy was actually very gentle. Even ordinary people wouldn't get hurt if they came into contact with it. It wouldn't be able to kill a chaos ancient god. However, when the river of energy rushed over, 3 Holy Soul Realm ear mice quickly took action. 3 identical other shore tokens appeared above their heads. Apparently, these tokens were all from stage 33. However, because they were of the auxiliary type, they were not very suitable for combat use. Nonetheless, the main purpose of the tokens was to compress the river of energy as they interacted with it. The river of energy was continuously compressed, and once again turned into crystals. The divine crystals were originally ores that contained a great amount of energy, but now, they were transformed into pure energy crystals. The energy contained in a piece of the compressed crystal was equivalent to that of 70 million divine crystals. In the past, the snake goddess also tried to condense all of the divine crystals to such an extent, so that it would be much easier to save and store them in the pear hill. However, after being fully compressed, the crystals became very unstable and weren't able to maintain the condensed state for a long time. The river of energy continued to roll and surge, and the energy crystals that were condensed floated in front of King Yayan. Above its head was a peculiar-looking other shore token. It was actually a living other shore token, the size of a palm, and looked exactly like a black cat. It was known as the Primordial Energy Cat, a magical creature that was found in stage 33 on the other shore. At first glance, it looked like a ferocious black cat, but it was actually an energy entity. Most times, it was in the form of an energy ball. Only when it was hunting would it turn into the form of a black cat. The Primordial Energy Cat had a very unique and extraordinary feature. For most other shore tokens and other shore creatures, they could only devour and consume a limited amount of divine crystals. Usually, for other shore tokens from stage 33, they could easily absorb millions to tens of millions of divine crystals, but that would be their limitation. Any amount higher than that would be difficult for them. However, that was where the exceptional feature of the Primordial Energy Cat differed from the others. It could absorb an unlimited amount of divine crystals. The more crystals it absorbed, the stronger it would become. When people discovered this insane characteristic, they all pinned their hopes of realizing the finale way on it. Even Foxy had the thought of subduing it before. Then, later, they found out that the attack method of the Primordial Energy Cat wasn't even strong. A world existed in its stomach, and the divine crystals that it devoured could only be utilized inside it. Most people, including Foxy, got so disappointed, but the snake goddess had an idea in mind and gave it to King Yayan as a gift. Together with King Yayan, she had set up the divine crystal array, which should come in handy in a critical situation. This time, before the war with the chaos ancient gods, the snake goddess had summoned King Yayan to help control the array. Oakley, Dempsey, King Yayan called out in a low voice. The 2 ear mice, who were standing beside it, hurriedly took out their other shore tokens. The duo was King Yayan's capable assistants. They were tasked to trap their opponents in the array for as long as they could. Meanwhile, Lamont was still bombarding the golden shield tirelessly. As he was busy dealing with the golden shield, he suddenly felt the flowing energy within the pear hill. Lamont thought that the flowing energy was used to stabilize the golden shield, so he did not pay much attention to it. Boom, boom, the golden shield shook more and more violently from Lamont's intense strikes. The disciples and members of the pear hill tried to replenish the divine crystals and infuse their energy into the cloud cover array as fast as they could. However, their speed wasn't enough to keep up with the rate of how the array consumed the divine crystals. Every time an attack hit the array, Yan's face turned paler. But as the primary controller of the cloud cover array, she couldn't move from her position. At such a crucial moment, even if she tried to flee, she would also die. King Yayan, Zen shouted. He turned to the jadeite platform with anxiety written all over his face. I hear you. We are ready, King Yayan replied. Dempsey, Oakley, attack. Crack, crack. A big crack suddenly appeared on the mountain wall not so far from the jadeite platform. Oakley took out its other shore token. It was a small golden piece called the heaven-shaking gold, and it was a one-time type of other shore token. As Oakley threw the gold out, it was quickly set ablaze. At the same time, beams of golden light shrouded the area. Amazingly, the golden light was not blinding or dazzling. Instead, it was bright but gentle to the naked eye. The moment the golden light bloomed, an irresistible spiritual storm appeared with it. No matter how powerful a person was, they were instantly affected by it. When Yan saw the golden light, her mind suddenly went blank and she lost her consciousness. Likewise, all the other creatures, who were illuminated by the golden light, experienced the same thing. Even Lamont was no exception. Although his soul was far stronger than any ordinary Eternal Realm warriors, it was unable to resist the surge of the spiritual storm. Among all the people present, Zen was the only exception. As the whole area was being illuminated by the golden light, he clearly felt the fluctuation of his bloodline inside his body. Before he could figure out what was happening, he saw Lamont stop his movement in midair. During this critical moment, even a few seconds could be fatal for any warrior like Lamont. Before they engaged in this battle, King Yayan and its subordinates had prepared and practiced countless times. The moment Lamont briefly stopped, a stone tablet instantly darted and made a clear hit. After the stone tablet attached to Lamont's body, it quickly emitted black ripples. The other stone tablet, which was on Dempsey's hand, reacted and emitted white ripples. When Dempsey saw that the black stone tablet had successfully attached itself to Lamont's body, it threw the one it was holding to King Yayan. Then, the primordial energy cat on top of King Yayan's head leapt and swallowed the white stone tablet in one go. Now, Dempsey didn't waste any time and activated the pair of stone tablets. The stone tablets were actually called the interchange stone tablets. Their ability was that they could instantly reverse the positions of the things that they were attached to. In the blink of an eye, Lamont's body, which was just outside the pear hill, suddenly disappeared and was brought into the belly of the primordial energy cat. At the same time, the white stone tablet, which was swallowed by the primordial energy cat, appeared midair outside the pear hill, where Lamont's body originally was. Zen, who was not affected by the heaven-shaking gold, was dumbfounded as he witnessed everything that happened. The swapping ability of the stone tablets didn't even produce space fluctuations. This kind of forcible interchange was very domineering. After swallowing Lamont whole, the primordial energy cat meowed towards King Yayan and lay on its shoulder. From the lazy expression of the primordial energy cat, it was as if it just swallowed an insignificant rodent. In the world in its stomach, a whole bunch of terrifying energy was raging. Chapter 3502, See the Cold Prison Again. Lamont didn't expect that the pear hill would have prepared so thoroughly. Without any defense, he was dragged into the belly of the primordial energy cat. In Pear Hill, Lamont only took the snake goddess and Fuxie seriously. The rest were close to nothing in his eyes. Little did he know that these nobodies didn't rely on Pear Hill to hold on and struggle for life, but tried to find a chance to kill him. Swoosh! Lamont could not believe his eyes as he saw countless massive energy windstorms that rotated at high speed. When he felt the terrifying energy, the contempt in his eyes disappeared and was replaced with an expression of uncertainty and caution. Where am I? This place exists in the Source World. There happen to be many dangerous places in the Source World, but most were only considered dangerous for true gods and the other Shore Realm warriors. As for the powerful masters like Lamont, there was no place in the chaos that they couldn't explore, nor was there any place dangerous enough to threaten their lives. However, today was a different story. This dangerous place was the last thing Lamont had expected. His initial reaction was to assume that he was merely hallucinating and that everything he saw was an illusion. However, with one simple distinction, he soon understood that this was real, and so was the roaring energy of this horrific place. Buzz! A strong space fluctuation burst out from the body of Lamont, who wanted nothing else but to leave the world. However, because the space was formed in the stomach of the primordial energy cat, his thurgies were completely ineffective. This is bad. As he realized the gravity of his situation, Lamont had already seen a mass of energy windstorm rolling towards him. In the past, his solid ice armor could withstand Yan's attack, because any energy that came into contact with it would soon be affected by the armor's extremely low temperature. The stronger the energy was, the higher its temperature would be. This meant that when the temperature dropped, the energy would grow stagnant. In conclusion, the solid ice armor was also the standing nemesis of the energy windstorm. However, the strength of the energy windstorm was far from what Lamont had expected. In the beginning, the energy windstorms had been blocked by the solid ice armor, but after the energy windstorm swept across the armor, they managed to leave thin lines across the surface. At first, there were dozens of lines, which later on became 1,000. The number of the lines increased too fast to even observe. When the number of lines on the armor reached hundreds of thousands, the armor shattered onto the ground. Condense. Ready for anything, Lamont instantly condensed his disintegrated armor. Within seconds, the once destroyed armor was good as new, and it attached itself onto his body easily. Then, the first wave of energy windstorms had dissipated, meaning Lamont withstood it head-on. But then came the second, the third and the fourth waves of energy windstorms that showed no mercy. Hundreds of thousands of energy windstorms existed in this world. Even at the edge of the world, more energy windstorms were generated from the thick, pure energy. Lamont gritted his teeth and held on, observing such a ruthless world. At this point, he felt like he was going crazy. Even the other shore tokens couldn't release such energy, so how did the Pear Hill even make it? Clatter. The solid ice armor shattered again. Although Lamont could condense his armor at will, it still consumed much of the power of truth within him. As Lamont's power of truth decreased each time the solid ice armor was condensed, the armor grew thinner and more vulnerable to the blows of the windstorms. But for some reason, though the energy windstorms in the belly of the primordial energy cat raged, it appeared quiet and still. Just then, it curled up on the shoulder of King Yayan, as if it was sound asleep. Meanwhile, King Yayan pressed its index finger on the primordial energy cat's head. By doing so, it could quickly observe what was happening in its belly. "Your Highness, what's the situation?" Dempsey asked politely. Because they had put so much effort into their mission, the handful of ear mice were naturally concerned. "I don't think he can hold out any longer," said King Yayan. Supposedly, the divine crystal array could kill a chaos ancient god according to its initial design. However, King Yayan was still nervous. After all, Lamont was in control of the truth. Oakley and Dempsey nodded in approval and waited silently. At the very top of Pear Hill, Zen and Yan heard the voice of King Yayan. The two of them sighed in relief. Finally, the chaos ancient god had been suppressed. Zen's state of mind happened to be much calmer than King Yayan's. Though Zen was much younger than King Yayan, what he had faced and conquered was far beyond what King Yayan had encountered. Over the many chaotic eras, many sons of truth had passed away. Furthermore, in the abstruse energy world, the sons of truth meant nothing. However, Zen and Yan paid close attention to the movements ongoing in the Pear Hill. They knew that before the chaos ancient god died, everything could change, so they had to be on guard. After 5 minutes passed, King Yayan slightly frowned and looked down. Just then, the primordial energy cat opened its eyes. Woo! The primordial energy cat sensed the strangeness that occurred in its inner world. But just as it was about to intensify the energy in its body, its stomach expanded to more than 200 feet wide. The rapid expanse even knocked King Yayan, Oakley, and Dempsey out of the way. Whoosh! Whoosh! Before King Yayan could regain its balance, the body of the primordial energy cat swelled up and expanded once again to more than 3,000 feet. This space created in the Pear Hill was only 5,000 feet high, and more than half of that space was occupied by the primordial energy cat. The expression on the creature remained innocent despite this, and it let out a roaring whine. "Your Highness." "Why?" Oakley and Dempsey sensed that something was wrong. King Yayan also shook its head in disbelief. Once again, the body of the primordial energy cat swelled up. This time, it rose to 50,000 feet wide. Boom! Under the pressure of the expanding body, the cave inside the Pear Hill cracked and fell apart. Seeing this, Zen, who watched from the jadeite platform, rose into the air and grabbed Yan. "Let's go." But, Yan was in charge of the cloud cover array, so she couldn't just leave without consent. "If you don't leave, you will die." Zen's tone was demanding and almost harsh. Yan hesitated for a moment and then pointed to a peak in the distance. "Let's head there first." It was the panoramic view peak, where the second center of the cloud cover array existed. She then brought the golden dress-like array to the panoramic view peak so that she could simultaneously control the entire cloud cover array. In sheer desperation, Zen hastily agreed. Just as he took his sister away, the body of the primordial energy cat swelled up again. From 50,000 feet in width, it rose to 3 million feet. The primordial energy cat didn't have the wild god body, so its physical ability could not withstand the pressure. Eventually, its round belly exploded with a loud bang. Lamont's massive body finally escaped and he restored himself into a huge monster. The middle of the pear hill was completely overturned by him. Moreover, the strange energy radiated from Lamont's body as a peculiar phenomenon appeared. The stones and trees that surrounded him seemed to have lost their weight as they hovered around him. After a moment, these stones and trees morphed into countless white dots of light that flashed dramatically and disappeared. Yan blinked her eyes as she saw this, surprised with what just happened. Zen was familiar with this as he had seen something similar in the Blooming Jade stage. It was the cold prison. With this cold prison to protect Lamont, no matter how powerful the energy was, it proved to be no threat to him. Chapter 3503, Just So. When any kind of material was trapped or came into contact with the cold prison, it would be instantly converted into a different form, and energy was no exception. No matter how strong the energy in the primordial energy cat's stomach was, it was rendered useless in the face of the cold prison. This turn of events was something that the snake goddess and King Yayan never expected. They didn't know the existence of the cold prison, nor did they see Lamont use such an ability before. If it was Othniel or Herbert, they were sure that the two would have perished in the primordial energy cat's stomach. Unfortunately, they had to deal with Lamont right now. Lamont looked down at a crushed stone in the pear hill. King Yayan, I'm disappointed at you. After colluding with the pear hill, this is all you can do. King Yayan stood on the stone and looked up at Lamont with a gloomy gaze. In the past, it once boasted as the richest creature in the source world. However, the massive amount of divine crystals that it had didn't bring any qualitative changes to its race. So, King Yayan decided to make use of the divine crystals. With the help of the snake goddess and Fuxi, the divine crystal array was flawlessly established. Everything went smoothly, or so they thought. Then came Lamont. In an instant, the tide of the battle suddenly went against their favor. All the terrifying energy that swarmed at Lamont turned into mere dots of light that vanished immediately after. Witnessing all that, King Yayan couldn't begin to imagine how powerful Lamont really was. Lucky for me, I have grasped the skill of creating the cold prison. If not, I might have died in your cat's stomach. But unfortunately for you. As he was still speaking, Lamont stretched out a finger and aimed at King Yayan below. A white aura began circling on his fingertip. An extreme murderous intent was oozing in his eyes. Swoosh! A blast of cold air was condensed into a white arrow. It quickly darted off from Lamont's finger and dashed towards King Yayan. King Yayan just stared at the approaching arrow, as if fear and helplessness crippled its entire body. My king, get a hold of yourself. You need to run. Oakley, Dempsey, and the 3 other ear mice rushed over to King Yayan as fast as they could. The 5 ear mice were King Yayan's most trusted subordinates. Even in the most hopeless situation, their loyalty and passion to protect their king remained undaunted. Divine Picture Shield. Suddenly, a round purple shield appeared above Oakley's head. Aside from the heaven-shaking gold, the Divine Picture Shield was its most powerful other shore token. It was a defense-type other shore token from stage 33. The power of any kind of attack that came in contact with it would automatically be reduced to 1/3 of its original strength. With this, even if Lamont was a high-level Eternal Realm Master, Oakley was confident that it would withstand his attack. Whoosh! Oakley's eyes widened as it saw that the white arrow pierced through the Divine Picture Shield. It didn't stop for one bit, and it drilled into Oakley's chest. Immediately after, Oakley became frozen like an ice sculpture. Seeing what happened, Dempsey, who was behind Oakley, immediately threw an interchange stone tablet towards the white arrow. The moment it latched onto the arrow, Dempsey activated the stone tablets. In the blink of an eye, the white arrow disappeared and reappeared in another direction where it pierced into another huge piece of rock. The rock that came into contact with the arrow became brittle and instantly shattered into a pile of ice dregs. King Yayan came back to its senses and was astonished at Oakley's sudden death. Its face was quickly filled with grief and anger. It abruptly took out 2 other shore tokens, which were a pair of sharp and shiny knives. The light reflecting on the knives left countless deep cuts on the surface of the surrounding rebels. King Yayan knew that in one way or another, it was going to be killed by Lamont. So, it chose to fight until death rather than try to escape like a pathetic king. TCH, do you think your bravery will gain you anything? You useless rodent. Lamont had no intention of taking King Yayan seriously. So, he raised his hand and decided to kill the latter in a swift manner. Just then, several golden light blades came rushing from a distance and rained on Lamont. Swoosh, crash. The moment the light blades fell into the cold prison, they instantly turned into countless dots of light that eventually vanished. Standing on the panoramic view peak, Yan glared at Lamont with tremendous hostility. Zen knew the secret of the cold prison, and he also knew that at the current level of the energy shaft, it would be useless and too weak to break the cold prison, let alone damage Lamont. However, he didn't expect that Yan would suddenly make a move, so he had no time to stop her. Lamont was initially focused on dealing with King Yayan, but after Yan's sudden attack, she successfully attracted his attention. Human girl, I'd like to commend you for your courage. Lamont turned towards Yan with a huge ugly smile on his gorilla-like face. Immediately after, his huge body rushed towards her. Whoosh! Yan quickly unleashed the golden shield again. With the efforts of the ear mice, the energy of the cloud cover array was replenished to such an extent that the golden shield was quite solid. Then, Lamont stretched out a finger. In an instant, the shield turned into dots of light and immediately dissipated. Lamont let out a horrifying laugh. He quickly clenched his fist and attempted to throw a massive punch directed at Yan. As his fist was approaching her, the cold prison touched Yan and dispersed her energy. She didn't disappear but was transformed into a form under the extremely low temperature. It was actually very similar to the form outside of the chaos. Brother. As her consciousness was slowly fading, her instinct made her call for Zen. Suddenly, Zen's body expanded as he activated his wild god body. The truth was he didn't want to fight any chaos ancient god right now. Before he had mastered the ancestry-level bloodline, his strength was just comparable to that of an ordinary Eternal Realm warrior. However, he didn't have much choice right now. In the face of the overwhelming odds, he had to bite the bullet. In addition to unleashing his own strength, he could only bet on the power of the ancestry-level bloodline. I hope you can be smart enough to know what you are doing. In a flash, Zen's body expanded to a height of more than 4 million feet, like a huge mountain, protecting Yan at all costs. Lamont was over 10 million feet tall, so Zen was just half of his size. As Lamont threw the punch towards Yan, he clearly saw how Zen turned into a giant. A smile crossed his ferocious face and his expression became more intense. Come to think of it, is this the guy that Herbert mentioned? They said that they will be capturing him alive. Ha ha, they can't blame me. He's the one who walks into his death, Lamont thought. Even Lamont couldn't fully control the cold prison. Anything that came in contact with it would be ripped off its energy, and Lamont couldn't restore them either. Trying to protect Yan, Zen rushed into the cold prison and approached Lamont's fist by throwing his own massive punch. Lamont couldn't help laughing in his mind because he knew that Zen already fell into the trap, and he would surely end up like the others who became victims of the cold prison. However, Lamont's expression suddenly changed and his eyes widened. Crash! With a muffled sound, Zen's fist collided with Lamont's. Zen wasn't stopped by the cold prison and his energy didn't dissipate either. Due to the overwhelming force that Zen had put in his fist, Lamont was pushed back and had to take several steps backward. Lamont's force was undoubtedly more powerful than Zen's. However, he didn't use his full strength just now because he didn't expect that it would be necessary. As Lamont regained his balance, he stared at Zen with a visibly disorganized expression on his face. He was trying to understand what had just happened. He was thinking if Zen used a certain secret skill that he missed to notice. This can't be you. What did you do? Lamont knew very well how the cold prison worked, so he was flabbergasted at what just happened. What? You're wondering why the cold prison didn't work on me? Zen looked at his slightly stiff fist and brushed off the frost on its surface. Well, your cold prison is only so-so. Chapter 3504, Strengthen. The cold prisons in the blooming jade stage were forbidden lands for any creature, and even Zen didn't dare to enter. Only those who were as supernormal as Pompeo could stay in a cold prison. The cold prison had an extremely low temperature. What made it more terrible was that the creatures of the chaos seemed to slowly turn into light dots and then vanish into thin air inside it. Yet for the creatures of the abstruse energy world, the cold prison was not so dreadful. Even some relatively weak creatures of the abstruse energy world would only be temporarily frozen when they fell into it. Once they left the cold prison, they would recover from frozen state, and again return to being energized and vigorous. Zen had decided to take action because he was worried about Yan. Although the ancestry-level bloodline could defeat all the energy, the cold prison was very special. It could be possible that Zen himself might be destroyed in it. The moment he came into contact with the cold prison, the temperature began to rise unexpectedly. Zen felt it was easily breakable. You know this is the cold prison. And you were able to break it? Lamont finally uttered, after a moment of silence. There are many cold prisons in the blooming jade stage. Zen smiled. As to whether he could break it or not, he didn't need to answer. Lamont carefully looked at Zen. He had been thinking about whether he should kill him earlier. It seems that I thought too much. I'm afraid it will take me a lot of energy to defeat you. Swoosh. Lamont tilted his huge body and pounced towards Zen. He was an old monster that had lived for countless years. His eyes were extremely sharp and he possessed great knowledge. Indeed, Zen had an incredible method to break the cold prison. Even Lamont was convinced that he was capable. However, he also sensed that Zen's strength was not enough. Lamont's physical body was an advantage, it was no doubt that he could overthrow Zen. When Lamont went to face Zen, a red light flashed from Yan's eyes. Golden light blades appeared, moving in cutting motions towards his head. Lamont, having suffered from a loss once, drew a huge ice cover enclosing Yan's head. He then grabbed Zen in midair, and ruthlessly smashed him towards the pear hill. Boom, boom, Zen's more than 4 million foot tall body crashed into a mountain. The impact embedded his body onto the pear hill. The originally solid and huge mountain crumbled, almost becoming as soft as mud. It was unable to bear the damage of 2 giant creatures. Whoosh, a ray of white light flashed from Lamont's hand. A long and thin ice spike started to form and stabbed towards Zen's head. Zen had no time to dodge and instead reached out his hand to grab the ice spike. As the ancestry-level bloodline started a surge within Zen's body, the ice spike appeared to have been roasted and instantly melted into a pool of water. Lamont was stunned again. He frowned as he refused to use the power of truth any longer. He simply drew his fist back and powerfully punched Zen. Boom, boom, boom. The sudden vibration reverberated throughout the whole pear hill. The scene wasn't new for many people in the pear hill, but the mountain leaders, the sect leaders, the disciples, and the members of the race were unable to participate in such a level of battle. On the other hand, they needed to provide Yan with a steady flow of energy. Crack! Yan had finally smashed the ice cover on her head into little pieces. She looked for her brother, but when she saw him, her eyes turned red. He was being pressed and attacked on the ground. Buzz! The energy shaft began to shake violently. The energy gained through the cloud cover array had been released by Yan. With the help of the Heavenly Obsession civilization, the energy that the energy shaft could transform had greatly increased, but there was still a limit. The energy released by Yan exceeded this limit. Clatter, clatter, clatter. The huge golden blades spiraled at high speed and flew to hit Lamont. Overpowered by the golden blades, he immediately employed the cold prison again. The cold prison didn't have any effect on Zen, but it could entirely restrain Yan's energy attack. Without sound, light or vibration, the several huge golden light blades entered the cold prison and turned into tens of millions of white light dots before dissipating. Yan's chest heaved up and down while her face flushed into a strange red. This kind of energy overuse did great damage to her. Shortly, she became unable to use the energy shaft. She could only watch in agony as Lamont kept beating up Zen's body. Previously, during Zen's communication with the ancestry-level bloodline had massively strengthened him. However, this strengthening was limited, and was unable to block Lamont's attack. After the chaotic source spirits fell into fatigue, wounds and injuries began to cover Zen's body. Besides his control of the temperature, Lamont's physical quality also made him become outstanding among the Chaos Ancient Gods. At this time, Zen could resist if he used a civilization artifact's inheritance of world. He remembered that the primeval Lord of Heaven had given him the suggestion. But this suggestion was rejected by Zen. Even if he activated the inheritance of world, he might still not be a match for Lamont. After all, Lamont was skilled in dealing with the attacks of energy. He wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to continue convening the ancestry-level bloodline to come to his aid. Boom, 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 boom. Lamont attacked like a huge gorilla, his thick hands punching on Zen's body. Zen's chest bones cracked as they were broken into pieces. While Lamont was still launching his constant attacks, a slight confusion struck him. He felt that although Zen's strength was very weak, he wasn't likely to have given up struggling. He looked at Zen closely and wondered why under his body, Zen seemed to have stopped resisting. What's going on? Before Lamont could figure it out, something more strange happened. Zen began talking to himself. Aren't you afraid of being in another person's hands? If I lose, your situation will become worse. I don't think they will let you go. You're wasting your only chance. According to the information from the brush wielder and the 4 statues, Zen was the only one who had fused with the complete ancestry-level bloodline and was able to take it away. No one had ever done that before. Zen's communication with the ancestry-level bloodline distracted Lamont. Although he didn't stop punching, the agitation in his eyes was evident. It grew stronger and stronger as Zen continued to talk. Who was he trying to persuade? Was he trying to convince someone who could finish Lamont? Zen's chest suddenly cracked. Surprisingly, no blood flowed as his broken ribs were exposed, extending to both sides. The texture of the broken ribs quickly changed and the ribs like two rows of blades directed towards Lamont. The abrupt transformation broke off Lamont's attack. He felt an instinctive threat. If he didn't kill this brat, something unexpected would happen. Go to perdition, he shouted. He used up all his strength and smashed towards Zen's head. Zen's eyes, mouth, and nose sank, revealing a horrifying appearance. His face was deformed. As Lamont hit hard, his fist sunk deep into Zen's head with a sunken face. Out of instinct, Lamont tried to pull his fist back, but he failed. Chapter 3505, Helpless. Zen's head remained latched onto Lamont's hand as if he was biting into it. Then, Lamont raised his arm and lifted Zen's body with it. Let go of me, you mongrel. Lamont swiftly swung his arm sideways in an attempt to throw Zen into the pear hill. However, Zen remained firmly latched onto his hand. Even though Lamont was knowledgeable and powerful, a strong sensation of anxiety and vexation was creeping beneath his skin. Since Zen wouldn't let go, Lamont raised him high in the sky and smashed him down to the mountain. Unexpectedly, Lamont didn't feel that Zen was loosening his grip, so he smashed him again and again. In just a few seconds, several craters appeared on the top area of Pear Hill where Lamont repeatedly smashed Zen's body. However, even though Lamont felt that he almost used up all his strength, his hand was still unable to get rid of Zen. Yan grew worried and speechless as she saw her brother being beaten so furiously. Zen seemed to withstand all of Lamont's attacks, but it wouldn't be good for him to be continuously beaten like this. Crash, crash, crash. As Zen was still being rammed into the pear hill, a huge stone about 10 feet wide flew towards the side and almost hit King Yayan, who had just climbed out of the pear hill. Crack. Before the huge chunk of stone hit King Yayan, its tail whipped the stone at high speed, splitting it into two halves. The other ear mice also followed King Yayan and had a clear view of the brutal battle between Lamont and Zen. However, as they watched intently, there was a strange sensation that they couldn't shake off. Zen was a dear friend of the ear mouse race. All of the members present, including King Yayan, knew all of the miraculous things that he did in the past. They never even thought that Zen could already fight the Chaos Ancient God after he got out of the Eternal Scroll painting. I don't understand what's happening. Zen's current state is pretty strange. He seems to be seriously injured now, but he can still latch onto Lamont, an ear mouse told its observation. King Yayan nodded at the ear mouse's statement and stared at Zen with its soybean-sized eyes. His body has indeed become very strange. I don't think he is injured. It's as if his body voluntarily became like this. Does that mean that his bloodline affects his physical body this way? One of the ear mice blurted as it was lost in thought. Actually, it was not that unusual for an Eternal Realm warrior to obtain some kind of bloodline that could alter their physical body. However, King Yayan explained further, that's not exactly the point. Did you notice that for a while now, Lamont hasn't used his bloodline power? That's the most exceptional thing so far. Zen might have done something that we couldn't comprehend. The greatest reliance of Chaos Ancient Gods was their bloodline power, which was known as the Truth Level Theurgy. This was their basic foundation. However, when the power of truth became ineffective, they could only rely on their sturdy physical body. Bang, bang. After launching several consecutive attacks, Lamont finally had enough of it. He grabbed the air with his other hand and summoned a huge ice blade that was formed by thick white mists. At the back of Lamont's mind, he thought that since Zen had degenerated into this pitiful form, it would be impossible for him to resist his power of truth again. As the ice blade slashed towards Zen, Zen's strange body didn't react to it and just continued latching himself on Lamont's hand. However, just as the ice blade was about to touch Zen, one of his hands quickly responded. It seemed to have an extreme ability of perception, like having an eye of its own. His hand accurately held off the sharp edge of the blade and the blade didn't even cut him. Immediately after, the sharp ice blade melted completely. Then, his hand quickly went back. Lamont felt like he was going insane. He couldn't get rid of Zen or smash him to death. Moreover, his Theurgy was being completely suppressed. There was nothing left that he could do to beat him. The current situation was something new to Lamont and that was why he was very frustrated. Lamont never had the intention to take Zen seriously before, but now, he couldn't believe that he would become so troublesome. What is wrong with you? Why can't you die? Lamont was so exasperated now. He wanted to finish this useless battle as soon as possible, so he began dragging Zen to a mountain nearby. The peak was like a sharp sword that was soaring into the sky. It turned out to be the Sword Blade Peak, which was apparently guarded by the mountain leader, Dwight Shu. While on the mountain, Dwight Shu was also silently observing the vicious battle between Zen and Lamont. Upon seeing that the two were headed towards the mountain, he immediately gave an order to all the disciples stationed there. All disciples must retreat from the Sword Blade Peak at once. There were several mountains around the Pear Hill. In previous battles, the disciples in the mountains naturally felt their power. However, even if they tried their best to release their energy, the strong feeling of fear was still there. After all, it was a chaos ancient god that Zen was dealing with. If they were slightly affected, it might cost them their lives. Therefore, as soon as Dwight Shu gave the order to retreat, all the disciples hurriedly used the grand teleportation technique and dispersed in all directions. Just a moment ago, there were tens of thousands of people on the Sword Blade Peak, but now, it was completely empty. Lamont dashed in front of the Sword Blade Peak and stopped there. Then, he stretched his hand to pat the peak. Gradually, as Lamont continued to put his palm on the peak, the Sword Blade Peak became frozen solid and almost impregnable. Even Fuxi and the Snake Goddess would have a hard time destroying it. After freezing the peak, Lamont dragged Zen and made a giant leap into the sky. Upon seeing his course of action, King Yayan, Yan, Dwight Shu, and the others immediately understood what he was trying to do. Lamont brought Zen up in the sky and wanted to impale him straight into the Sword Blade Peak. Right now, this was the best idea that Lamont had thought. He didn't have any other good way to kill Zen on his current state. Zen might not be able to eliminate Lamont's power of truth, if his physical body fell down at high speed. He would be defeated once his body was successfully impaled through the Sword Blade Peak. However, just as Lamont aggressively dragged Zen up in the sky, one of Zen's arms suddenly stretched downward and extended as if it had lost all of its bones. It patted the Sword Blade Peak and injected a stream of green energy into it. Sizzle! The Sword Blade Peak, which was frozen solid just seconds ago, instantly melted. Not only that, the surface of the mountain blossomed into what seemed to be a fairyland, full of various plants all around. Lamont's jaw dropped while he was still in midair. Obviously, he was shocked at what just happened. Even the others who saw the scene were utterly surprised. Zen, what is this? Yan couldn't believe her eyes. Is this even a battle? Zen, a superior human being, and Lamont, a powerful chaos ancient god, were two of the most powerful beings in the entire chaos because of their abilities and strength. But right now, the battle between these two mighty beings was not making any sense. Lamont stayed in midair for a few more seconds, and then decided to go back down at the Sword Blade Peak. He patted the peak again and infused the power of truth into it. After quite some time, Lamont noticed that the Sword Blade Peak wasn't freezing. As he lowered his head, Lamont saw Zen's slender and boneless hand was also touching the mountain, countering the effect of his power of truth. Ha ha, what the heck? In the distance, Dwight Shu couldn't help but burst out laughing. King Yayan and the other ear mice on the other side of Pear Hill also laughed out loud. Even Yan temporarily forgot that her brother was in danger. She just couldn't believe that a vicious battle would turn into a comedy show. You mongrel! Lamont felt that he was going crazy. His angry roar echoed throughout the entire Pear Hill. Chapter 3506, Devour. In a fit of rage, Lamont's eyes flashed as he activated the full bloodline power in his body. An invisible yet tangible chill spread out. Although Yan tried to block the chill with the help of the cloud cover array, it was much colder than before. The people on the edge of the Pear Hill were alright, but the disciples in the middle of the hill started to shiver from the cold. Many of them started releasing flames to prevent themselves from getting frostbite. 3 blue spheres began to appear in the sky, one by one. They almost looked like blue suns, but the light they emitted was not warm at all. Everyone felt as though they had fallen into a cold hell. With the appearance of the 3 blue suns, the temperature in the Pear Hill dropped sharply. Whoosh! Raising his hand above his head, Lamont lifted Zen up as though he were some sort of a sacrificial offering. Go to perdition, 3 freezing suns. This had been Lamont's most powerful theurgy before he figured out how to create the cold prison from the truth power. The 3 blue suns flashed an icy blue, and azure arrows made of ice started raining from them, shooting straight towards Zen. Lamont thought that Zen had some kind of bloodline that could withstand, or even restrain, the coldness. Zen didn't seem to flinch in the face of the coldness, so Lamont was quite frustrated to have him as an opponent. However, Lamont believed there was a limit to Zen's bloodline power. With his truth power as a Chaos Ancient God, Lamont was confident in his own strength. Now that all his bloodline had been activated, he was determined to defeat Zen. Clatter, 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 countless thick ice arrows shot down towards Zen. Anyone else would have been pierced to shreds in just a few seconds. However, there seemed to be an invisible energy film on the surface of Zen's body. The ice arrows that touched this energy film bounced off him, leaving him unharmed. Lamont had already anticipated this, but he believed that the bloodline power within Zen's body would be used up sooner or later. With the 3 freezing suns, Zen would be exhausted to death. However, what Lamont did not know was that Gerald and Judson had already tried this method. The 2 Chaos Ancient Gods had worked together to try to exhaust Zen's ancestry-level bloodline, but they ended up failing. Little did Lamont know that he too was doomed to fail. Clatter, 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 countless huge ice arrows continued to shoot at Zen, and the ice debris falling from the sky froze some areas of the Pear Hill. Even a thumb-sized piece of ice was extremely lethal. The creatures on the Pear Hill kept moving so as to avoid the collateral damage caused by the battle between Lamont and Zen. Since Lamont was so focused on dealing with Zen, Yan and the others were left idle. The leaders of the mountains and the sects quietly yet anxiously watched the battle in the sky. The battle between Zen and Lamont was going to determine the fate of the Pear Hill, so naturally, they were quite anxious. Zen is doomed to die under such heavy bombardments. He doesn't have the ability to fight back at all. Alas, it's impossible for him to defeat a Chaos Ancient God. Many people fretted as they watched the powerful ice arrows rain on Zen. Just a single piece of ice debris that was spattered out could kill a warrior at the Holy Soul Realm. How could Zen survive from so many ice arrows? The ice arrows kept attacking Zen. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. 15 minutes. The crowd held their breath as they continued to watch the ice explode in front of Lamont, who held Zen in front of him. From the ground, they couldn't see what exactly was happening in the skies. With each minute that passed, their confusion grew. There had been countless ice arrows. If it were any Eternal Realm warrior, or even Fuxi and the Snake Goddess, they would have been smashed to pieces by now. But why was Lamont still attacking? More than an hour had passed. The scattered ice dregs left several mountains white with snow. The 3 blue suns in the sky gradually dimmed, and the ice arrows that fell down became weaker and weaker. Lamont's bloodline power is starting to weaken, said King Yayan, its brows furrowing. Zen had managed to exhaust the bloodline power of a Chaos Ancient God. Just how powerful was he? Splash, splash, splash. Less and less arrows were shot out of the 3 suns, and it seemed they had slowed down, too. Zen finally emerged from the explosions of ice, unharmed. The crowd let out a sigh of relief, and started cheering. Lamont looked at Zen in front of him, his eyes wide with fear. Stunned, he finally realized he had used up all his bloodline power, and yet, Zen still remained here unscathed. Did this mean Zen would cling to him for the rest of eternity? Lamont never thought that he was only half right. After Zen felt that his bloodline power began to weaken, his face spread towards his arm again. Zen's head turned into a ring and passed through Lamont's arm, leaning on his shoulder. Lamont was no stranger to danger, but he was still terrified in this moment. Just as Lamont attempted to pry the ring off, he shrieked in pain. Zen's ribs were like sharp blades, tearing through his body. Idiot off. Lamont wanted to push Zen away with brute force. In terms of pure strength, without a doubt, Lamont was much stronger. However, before he could even try pushing Zen off, Lamont felt another sharp pain in his back. Craning his neck to see what had happened, Lamont nearly fainted at the sight. The ribs that had pierced through his body had grown barbs that were several thousand feet long. These barbs firmly locked his body with Zen's. Monster. An incredible monster. Lamont was finally too frightened to even speak fluently. He had never felt so scared in his life. His mind was whirling. Not knowing what to do, Lamont began to struggle desperately. But the more he tried, the deeper the barbs sank into his skin. No matter what Lamont tried, he couldn't get rid of the barbs. He felt as if he was the prey of a spider web, and was slowly devoured by the monster in front of him. Exhausted, his body gradually paralyzed and finally sank into darkness. Even Yan and King Yayan couldn't help but show a trace of panic when they saw what Zen did. Was this truly the man they knew as Zen? Or was this some kind of monster? At the top of the Pear Hill, Zen lay on the side of a mountain. He had been conscious this whole time, but he had completely lost control of his body. After he swallowed Lamont, his body changed again. The wound on his chest gradually healed. A huge armor began to spread out from his chest, and many white hairs grew on his back. His arms became longer and stronger, resembling those of a gorilla. Am I assimilated after I swallowed Lamont? Or did the ancestry-level bloodline do it on purpose? Zen thought to himself. With what had happened just now, his bodily transformations didn't surprise him anymore. The ancestry-level bloodline could completely change the shape of one's body. Even if part of his body had been assimilated after he devoured Lamont, the ancestry-level bloodline should have been able to quickly repair it. However, it was possible there were other underlying reasons as to why his body took on some of Lamont's physical characteristics. Chapter 3507, Reinforcements. Yan floated over slowly and then gazed at the huge body in a vigilant manner. To be honest, it was a bit difficult for her to link this huge monster with her brother. It just didn't seem possible. However, she had personally witnessed the entire fierce battle herself. There was no doubt about it. This was undoubtedly Zen. Brother, Yan called out. Hearing her voice, Zen raised his head slowly. When she saw Zen's face, Yan took a deep breath and involuntarily retreated a few steps back. Rigid, round muscles had swollen to bulges around Zen's face. These special muscles were as tough and indestructible as powerful and refined magical treasures. His eyes, nose and mouth were almost completely invisible due to those muscles. The sunken structure could now protect his eyes, ears, mouth and nose as much as possible. However, it was extremely horrible to watch. He looked uglier than a fiend. Forcing the disgust she was feeling deep inside her, Yan called out once again, "Brother, is that you?" Zen smiled and reached out his hand to her as if to say, "I am here, sis." This gesture finally relieved Yan. She took Zen's palm and pouted softly, "Brother, why have you become like this?" "I am sorry. This is something that I can't control," Zen replied, shaking his head. After he had changed his form, his voice had also changed a lot. His voice didn't seem to be coming from his throat anymore. Instead, it was a chesty growl. It was not only hoarse but also quite harsh. His looks don't matter. What we witnessed is that he killed a chaos ancient god by himself. King Yayan floated to Yan's side. Its bean-sized eyes were full of appraisal for the half-man, half-beast in front of it. This body may be ugly in your eyes, but it is remarkably strong. It is made for battle. Zen had killed a chaos ancient god by himself. He was the first warrior to ever manage that feat in the entire source world. Moreover, he had killed Lamont by devouring him, which meant that the killing process had actually made Zen stronger. This man had really lived up to everyone's expectations. Made for battle? Come on, it's too ugly. It doesn't even look human, Yan said as she sniffed. She wanted the best for her brother. Looking at his sister's reluctant expression, Zen smiled and tried to comfort her. "It's okay. I might be able to change back after I dissipate the wild god power out of my system." Then his body began to shrink rapidly. When it reached about 10 feet in height, the shrinking stopped, and Zen's appearance didn't come back either. As he looked at his fluffy hands and his body the size of a gorilla, his face became a little pale, as if he were afraid. In the past, whenever he cultivated other strange thurgies, his physical body had also changed, but those changes were controllable, and he had never looked so ugly. If he really couldn't change back, it would be troublesome. The problem most likely lay in the ancestry-level bloodline. Just as Zen was about to communicate with the ancestry-level bloodline, a rumble came from the distance. Looking in the distance, he saw that the noise had been caused by a crack on the ground. After that, Zen, Yan, King Yayan and the others saw a giant crack appearing in the distance and spreading towards the edge of the pear hill. It didn't stop until it had touched the boundary wall. After seeing what was happening in the distance, which was crystal clear due to its magnitude, King Yayan took a deep breath and said, "They have ruined the Taoism province." The Taoism province was the farthest place that could be seen from the pear hill. It was normal for dozens of provinces to be ruined when several chaos ancient gods fought. It was impossible to imagine just how much havoc they wreaked everywhere they went. "I wonder how the snake goddess is doing," Yan muttered. She was still worried about the safety of the snake goddess and Fuxi. "Don't worry, they have their real selves with them, so they should be fine," Zen comforted her. He was right. The strength of the real Fuxi and the real snake goddess was high enough to easily fight against a chaos ancient god. Coupled with the strength of Eastern Emperor Tai, as well as Gerald and Judson on their side, they were surely at a good advantage, if not a great one. Crack, crack, crack. Before anyone could say something, a second crack appeared, and the entire Taoism province directly disappeared in a pile of dust. Faced with such a fierce battle, Zen finally couldn't sit still anymore. If the people of Pear Hill and the Chaos Ancient Gods on their side were really defeated, then they would lose Pear Hill. The magical ability that the ancestry-level bloodline had just displayed had allowed Zen to devour Lamont. He could feel Lamont struggling inside his body, but as the ancestry-level bloodline continued to change form, it finally managed to digest Lamont and assimilate his powers for Zen's use. It looked like the ancestry-level bloodline would never let him fall into the hands of the element spirit civilization. This meant that he could easily use the ancestry-level bloodline to his advantage. I'll go and have a look. Yan, you protect Pear Hill along with King Yayan. Whoosh, Zen floated in the air and disappeared, leaving a burst of shadows behind him like a rocket trail. Two huge cracks had appeared right in the heart of the Taoism province, like the two jaws of a monster trying to devour the province. Giant brown chaotic clouds were floating quietly under those cracks. Suddenly, they began to surge, and a golden sword light rushed out, which stirred the heaven and earth. Splash, splash, splash. The sword light extended around for tens of millions of feet and stabbed towards one side of the chaotic clouds. Bang, bang, bang. It seemed like the golden sword light collided with something solid inside those clouds, and the crisp sound it caused could be heard across tens of millions of miles. Any creature that was too close to the clouds would have been shattered by the intense sound wave. Whoosh. However, unable to break that solid object with several consecutive strikes, the attacker rapidly retreated. After something rushed out of the chaotic clouds, everyone finally saw who the attacker was. He was Eastern Emperor Tai, and he had activated the wild god body and was now more than 6 million feet in height. Oh, you want to escape? It's too late for that. Just as Eastern Emperor Tai was about to retreat, he bumped into an invisible wall. With a groan, he rolled over and tried to cross the wall from the other side. However, both sides of the wall were sealed by an invisible force field, and he was trapped. The next moment, Othniel appeared outside the wall. His single eye, gigantic in size, was filled with a trace of anger and depression. The strength that the Pear Hill had displayed in this fight was far beyond his expectations. Eastern Emperor Tai, Fuxi and the Snake Goddess had already made several powerful strikes. Gerald and Judson were also on the opponent's team. If it weren't for the Grand Master of Heaven, Othniel and Herbert would have already been defeated and the battle would have been over. While the Grand Master of Heaven was busy fighting Gerald and Judson, Othniel had managed to find a chance to trap Eastern Emperor Tai. However, Eastern Emperor Tai didn't seem too worried by the fact that he had been trapped. Buzz! A strong bloodline power darted out of his body, and a golden sword light surged, spreading across the entire visible space. Bang, bang, bang. The sword light bounced back and forth, like laser beams between mirrors in the space that had trapped Eastern Emperor Tai. However, the space seemed remarkably stable. It could not be destroyed so easily. It's useless to struggle. Our bloodlines determine the difference in our strength, Othniel sneered. With a flash of blue light that rushed out of his eye, several smaller spaces began to appear in a crisscross fashion across the space that had trapped Eastern Emperor Tai. Othniel seemed to want to use these small spaces to directly cut Eastern Emperor Tai into countless pieces. When the small spaces began to appear, they immediately targeted Eastern Emperor Tai's body and locked onto him. Numerous large and small cuts appeared on the surface of his body. The cuts continued to deepen rapidly, and blood began to flow out. Just as Othniel was about to breathe a sigh of relief with the feeling that he had finally defeated at least one of the opponents, a small figure suddenly appeared at the top of the spaces he had created. Chapter 3508, Struggle. Zen's appearance hadn't returned to normal. He was still a 10 feet tall monster, and in this form, his aura had also undergone a huge change. At a glance, Othniel could not recognize him. But under current circumstances, any creature daring to come down could not be ordinary. Swoosh! The blue light in Othniel's only eye flickered and a space formed on either side of Zen. If these spaces could restrain him, he'd be able to cut him in half with ease. But as soon as they enveloped Zen's body, they dissipated immediately. What? Othniel was dumbfounded, and he quickly thought of Zen in his mind. Was this monster actually him? This thought lingered in his mind when Zen suddenly grew even more, to a monster more than 8 million feet tall. When Zen had previously activated his wild god body, he was only capable of expanding to around 4 million feet high. Before he had activated it this time, he still believed that was his limit. He now realized, however, that his body had doubled in size. Was it because he had devoured Lamont? Othniel had a bad feeling about this. Zen had been able to break the Grand Master of Heaven's fishing drum, and the triangular world he had summoned, quite easily. If this horrific monster truly was Zen, he was now stuck in quite a terrible situation. Even more curious were Lamont's features that this monster shared. such as his long, strong arms with the white hair on them. "Who are you?" Othniel asked brazenly, raising his head. All Zen offered was an ugly smile. He then raised his foot and stamped down lightly, creating a huge crater in the space that imprisoned the real Eastern Emperor Tai. "It really is him." Othniel was now sure it was Zen, only he could break through his space barrier so quickly and easily. But why had he become this monstrosity? He was still lost in confusion when the real Eastern Emperor Tai had thrust his sword out, sending countless golden rays of sword radiance bursting out. Phew, the space already had a big hole in it and now the sword radiance obliterated it into pieces. Swish, swish, swish. The sharp golden radiance covered Othniel like a net. His space barrier could hold the real Eastern Emperor Tai, but it didn't mean he had the power to do as he pleased to him. Once the real Eastern Emperor Tai had pushed his own bloodline to the limit, he displayed an outrageous and terrifying level of swordsmanship. If Othniel wasn't careful, he'd be sliced up for sure. He retreated as fast as he could, at the same time clapping his hands and creating space shields 10 million feet wide, one after the other. Bang, bang, bang. The real Eastern Emperor Tai chased him down relentlessly, shattering every space shield he came across. The golden sword light was like the god of death, not resting until it had taken him. He then went all out, doing all he could to shake off the real Eastern Emperor Tai. As he did, he suddenly felt a space fluctuation from above. As the Chaos Ancient God in charge of the space truth, Othniel was extremely sensitive to space fluctuations, and as soon as he felt it, he knew it was Zen who had begun attacking him. Buzz! He pointed upwards as a reflex and a space fluctuation surrounded Zen, ready to exile him to a corner of the chaos. Othniel had lost sight of the fact that his original intention of attacking the Pear Hill was to complete the Element Spirit Race's mission, capture Zen at all costs. But he now planned to exile him because he felt threatened. It mattered not. As the space fluctuations gathered on Zen's body, they disappeared instantly, without a trace. It was then that Othniel felt clearly that Zen's body had given off a space fluctuation opposite to his to counter his exile force. How is this possible? Othniel's eye was overflowed with disbelief. A power absolutely opposite to his own power of space actually existed in the chaos. If he hadn't seen it with his own eye, he wouldn't have believed it. More to it, Zen had pulled it off so effortlessly. Othniel still hung in a state of astonishment when Zen pounced over and seized him from behind into his tight grip. Swish, swish, swish. From not far off, the real Eastern Emperor Tai took this opportunity to attack, the golden sword radiance exploding and inflicting many bloody holes on Othniel's body. Othniel then desperately activated his bloodline power to teleport himself away. The blue space truth circled around his body, making him seem like an object about to disappear. His body morphed back and forth between a shadow and a real body of substance, popping in and out of view. Puff, 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 puff. Othniel continued struggling as 16 ribs as sharp as swords, shot out of Zen's chest and pierced into his body. Then the barbs that grew from the ribs bound the two bodies firmly together. The real Eastern Emperor Tai had been in Zen's inner world this whole time, so he had a general understanding of the ancestry-level bloodline within him. Even so, what he saw now shocked him to his core. How did this kid have such an attack method? Othniel felt the pain and knew something bad was about to happen. There was still a considerable gap between him and Lamont in their abilities to use truth-level thurgies. Lamont was skilled at controlling temperature. Relying on extreme cold, he was almost immune to all energy attacks. This was why the divine crystal array of King Luan had failed to hurt him. As for Othniel, his skill lay in controlling space and his thurgy was unparalleled in confinement and escape. With a roar, Othniel's body suddenly collapsed. Like a tower made of sand. Every grain of sand within his body turned into a minimum space, which was the smallest matter in the chaos. Only then did Othniel finally rid himself of Zen's control. An 8-foot-tall person was made up of tens of billions of minimum spaces. Othniel's massive body possessed way more than that. Innumerable minimum spaces, indistinguishable to the naked eye, moved to another spot where Othniel's body gradually reformed. This process was, however, heavily draining for him. When he finally looked at Zen again, fear filled his eye as he realized that if he had not just put everything he had into escaping, he would probably have lost his life. What Zen said next proved him right. Impressive. Your method is much smarter than Lamont's, but that's it. The voice that rang from his chest sounded very strange. Othniel suddenly widened his eye. Lamont has descended to the Pear Hill. What happened to him? In his heart he already knew the answer. The white hair and the pair of arms on Zen's body told him all he needed to know, but it was still hard to accept that a Chaos Ancient God had died at Zen's hands. After all, for as long as one could recall, a human had never killed a Chaos Ancient God. As existences that controlled the truth in the Chaos Ancient Gods were thought to be invincible. He is dead, Zen said decisively, giving Othniel the answer he least wanted to hear. Chapter 3509, Lawless Cage. It was true that there were many forces in the chaos, but it didn't make things complicated. After the 6 Chaos Ancient Gods split into 2 factions, the division of powers in the source world became quite stable. Fuxi was the one who wanted to complete the finale way the most. He tried his best to make himself stronger, enough to kill the Chaos Ancient Gods and break the balance. The only thing was that the Chaos Ancient Gods were invincible, and this was one of the truths in the chaos. He couldn't break that truth, but Zen had surprisingly done it. Othniel looked at Zen again, but this time with a hint of fear and caution. After all, the Chaos Ancient Gods were not immortal. Anyone whose life was on the line, like him, would be on guard. Although he already believed what Zen said, he still countered, "Just you. Don't brag about yourself." Zen glanced at him indifferently and said, "You'll know whether I'm bragging or not soon." As he spoke, he suddenly disappeared from where he stood. Moreover, his disappearance didn't cause any space fluctuation, nor did he build a space channel. It was as if he had used another theurgy that never existed before to teleport. Naturally, Othniel was shocked when he saw that Zen had disappeared. After all, he was a Chaos Ancient God in charge of the space truth. What skillful method did Zen use to avoid his detection? Buzz. His eye glowed a bright blue, then he released a mighty truth power. That was when he finally noticed something. There was an immensely thin line in the black void that moved like a worm as it swiftly approached him. When he got to see it more clearly, it was already quite close to him. Go. In turn, he used the grand teleportation without a second thought. Zen had already jumped out from the end of the line the moment Othniel disappeared, but it was too late. Othniel had already teleported far away. He actually spotted me. If it was any other Chaos Ancient God, they probably couldn't have done that. Zen shrugged. After the ancestry-level bloodline devoured Lamont, it naturally became more interested in consuming Chaos Ancient Gods. The ancestry-level bloodline also played an active role when Zen dealt with Othniel. For instance, the bloodline released this particular space theurgy that even Othniel found it hard to see through it. Zen almost succeeded in devouring him just now. Even though Othniel could also still turn into multiple minimum spaces to escape, such a method consumed a lot of energy, and he might not be able to get away after a few uses. As for Zen, he failed to catch Othniel at his first attempt. At that point, he turned around and nodded at the real Eastern Emperor Tai. The real Eastern Emperor Tai understood what Zen meant. His eyes flashed with a sharp light, and the long sword in his hand turned into golden lights that filled the sky and swept towards Othniel. At the same time, Zen disappeared again. Othniel dodged the real Eastern Emperor Tai's golden sword radiance and simultaneously watched out for the curved line. The line was easy to miss, and it was almost impossible to distinguish it among the bright golden sword radiance. He used the grand teleportation once more, and his large body dashed forward while he avoided the golden sword radiance. In a short amount of time, he was already millions of miles away. But the moment he stopped, the line appeared behind him out of nowhere. Meanwhile, Zen's ribs extended and seized him from behind once again. Puff, 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 puff. The thick, sharp ribs pierced through his body and left 16 gaping, bloody holes on it. This time, he did not struggle anymore. He immediately turned into trillions of minimum spaces and escaped from Zen's arms before his body condensed and took shape again. However, although he was powerful, he felt exhausted the second time he turned into multiple minimum spaces. Just as he took shape again, Zen disappeared and turned into a thin line once more, then flew straight towards him. He didn't even have a chance to catch his breath. As he observed Zen's aggressive attack, he only sighed and finally chose to exile. He couldn't exile Zen, but he could exile himself. When Zen appeared at the end of the thin line, Othniel had already gone to the edge of the source world. He didn't use the grand teleportation this time. Of course, he was surprised. He must have exiled himself. I'm afraid it will take some time to get him back, the real Eastern Emperor Tai said with certainty. He sure ran fast, Zen muttered with a shrug. At that point, the chaos cloud in the distance burst and unleashed a strong energy fluctuation. He and the real Eastern Emperor Tai glanced at each other, then swiftly went straight for the chaos cloud. The chaos cloud was incomparably enormous. It was so big that a body millions of feet high was only like a drop in the ocean compared to it. Outside the chaos cloud were 16 tall purple pillars that floated in the air. Each purple pillar was painted with mysterious patterns and contained vast amounts of hidden power. Then, the purple pillars turned into a perfect cage and trapped all those from the pear hill inside it. The real Foxy, the real snake goddess, Gerald, and Judson all had suffered heavy injuries. There was a big hole 1,000,000 feet wide on the real Foxy's chest. A black fire burned on the hole to prevent the horrible wound from healing. On the other hand, Judson lost an arm, and half of his head got broken. However, Gerald looked the worst of them all. Both of his pincers were damaged. Only the real snake goddess looked slightly better. Although she was not injured, her face still looked fatigued. The battle with the Grand Master of Heaven had cost a lot of her energy. Gerald's life truth level 30 could immediately heal all their wounds, but the black fire kept their wounds burning at bay. The black fire was the nemesis of the life truth. Back then, it took Gerald a lot of time to get rid of the black fire when it burned him once. Now that he was currently in an intense battle, he didn't have time to help his companions deal with the fire. Furthermore, the cage formed by the purple pillars was the lawless cage, which Herbert had made using the confinement truth. Therefore, the warriors who were inside it lost half their strength. The Grand Master of Heaven stood on one of the purple pillars and looked down at them. "I can give you a chance to join our nihility race and surrender to me," he said with a cold smile. As Herbert, who had built the lawless cage, heard those words, his face instantly darkened. It was true that the Grand Master of Heaven was powerful, but Herbert also contributed greatly in subduing the four warriors. Also, his stand was completely different from the Grand Master of Heaven's. The only reason they worked together was that they wanted to fight against the Pear Hill. After that, a battle would probably ensue between them. Now, the Grand Master of Heaven wanted to make all the people of the Pear Hill surrender to him. How could he accept that? "Grand Master of Heaven, you and I worked together in order to take down the Pear Hill. These people can't be restrained, they can only be killed," he said bluntly. The Grand Master of Heaven turned to look at him and sneered, "Why should I listen to you? I also did my part to take them down," he threatened. "If I remove the lawless cage, I'm afraid you'll also be in trouble." No matter how strong the Grand Master of Heaven was, it was hard for him to deal with the two Chaos Ancient Gods at the same time. What was more, the real Foxy and the real Snake Goddess were there as well, so he was less likely to win the fight. "This lawless cage is indeed powerful, but I'm afraid you are not the only one who could control it," the Grand Master of Heaven said nonchalantly and ignored the threat. Suddenly, 4 of the 16 purple pillars rose and trapped Herbert. Chapter 3510, The Desperate End. Back then, the Grand Master of Heaven had made a contract with Othniel using the contract restricting twin-headed snake. According to the contract, he would not attack Othniel before taking down Pear Hill. However, the contract didn't mention anything about Herbert. Now that he had taken advantage of Herbert to capture the people of Pear Hill and possessed the same abilities as the latter, Herbert no longer had any value to him. "What do you mean by doing so, Grand Master of Heaven?" Herbert's face darkened. He already felt that he had gotten quite weaker in the lawless cage. If he completely lost control of the lawless cage, then the Grand Master of Heaven could do anything to him. "I'm eliminating my future enemies in advance. Is there anything wrong about that?" The Grand Master of Heaven stated matter-of-factly. As the head of the Nihility race, the Grand Master of Heaven was one of the element spirit civilization's mortal enemies. It was inevitable for him to confront Herbert. Herbert's body began to glow brightly as he tried hard to activate his bloodline power. As the powerful energy surged in his body, the purple pillars also began to glow. It was clear that he was scrambling for control over the lawless cage. If he was still outside the lawless cage, he could have probably defeated the Grand Master of Heaven with his excellent understanding of the truth power. But now, the lawless cage greatly limited his strength. His struggle only lasted for a few seconds before victory was declared. In the end, he had to admit defeat to the Grand Master of Heaven. "As the leader of the Nihility race, you are shameful to be such a treacherous man." Herbert snapped resentfully. "I never swore anything to you. What made me treacherous?" the Grand Master of Heaven said with a shrug. At that point, Herbert was too angry to speak anymore. Unlike the other Chaos Ancient Gods, he rarely traveled around the mortal world. Thus, he didn't know about such lies and deceit. HMPH, the Nihility race and the element spirit civilization are all the same. They only come to you when they need something from you, then they will kill you the moment you're of no use to them. I tried to convince you before, but you ignored my words like nothing." Foxy suddenly shouted from the side. Foxy had lent his body to the real Foxy, but he still got detained in the end. Still, he didn't blame it on the real Foxy. After all, things might have ended up worse if he had personally fought in the battle. When he saw that Herbert also got incarcerated in the lawless cage, he couldn't help but grab control of his body again so he could sneer at Herbert. In the past, he had almost won Herbert over to their side. However, the latter finally believed other people's lies and chose to follow the purge way. As for Herbert, he was enraged at first, but expressed mockery upon hearing Fuxie's words. "Isn't Pear Hill the leader of the finale way? You thought you were right and justified, but all of you just ended up like me," he retorted. At that moment, Fuxie, the real snake goddess, Gerald, and Judson, all felt downhearted. The end of chaos would bring about destruction sooner or later. The chaos had already experienced many ends now. When the ends of the previous rounds of chaos came, people still had a chance to fight back. In this round, however, they didn't even get to try. It was truly pathetic. "Even if we can't complete the finale way in this round of chaos, we will have another chance in the next round," Fuxie shot back. Herbert laughed and pointed towards the Grand Master of Heaven. "Now that victory belongs to him in the Nihility race, do you think there will be another round of chaos?" he scoffed. Fuxie glanced at the Grand Master of Heaven, and he finally felt hopeless. He and the Snake Goddess knew their mission very well ever since the establishment of Pear Hill. The finale way remained engraved in their bones, and they were not afraid to sacrifice themselves for it. He believed that after many rounds of chaos, a noble hero would emerge and lead them to their victory. If they could not do it after trying 1,000 times, then they would try 10,000 times. If they could not do it after trying 10,000 times, then 100,000 times. Besides, time was quite cheap compared to their eternal cause. As long as it was still possible to complete the finale way, they would eventually succeed after countless attempts. That was Fuxie's belief. However, at that moment, he realized that he had underestimated the Nihility race. They were simply a group of insane monsters. The most incredible thing about it all was that the leader of the Nihility race was a real human. "Why did you choose the Nihility way?" Fuxie raised his head and asked. The connection between the Grand Master of Heaven and the 77th civilization was clear to the real Fuxie and the real Snake Goddess, but not to him. "You are just a replica. It's meaningless for you to know much," the Grand Master of Heaven said indifferently. "You just need to know that if you want to live, you have to submit to me," he declared. As soon as he finished speaking, he shook his long sleeve, then a black ship came out of it. The captain of the black ship leapt out from the bow and simultaneously activated the wild god body. Then, he summoned the contract-restricting twin-headed snake. "Make your vow before the contract-restricting twin-headed snake. If you submit to the Grand Master of Heaven and join the Nihility race, you can live," said the captain. Generally speaking, not even a Chaos Ancient God could escape the restrictions of such contracts. Once they took an oath, they had to follow it all their lives. "If you refuse, I'll send you to perdition," the Grand Master of Heaven stated in a deathly calm voice as if he didn't care about their choices at all. Fuxie, the real Snake Goddess, Judson, Gerald and Herbert all fell silent. Warriors at their level could afford to accept death, but they still had to consider their companions' situations if they died. Most importantly, defeat in this war would probably cost Pear Hill everything. "My time is limited," the Grand Master of Heaven chirped as he gently brandished the cyan misty sword. Cyan sword radiance mixed with black fire swayed on the edge of the weapon. This battle only eliminated Pear Hill's forces, and the Grand Master of Heaven knew he hadn't won the final victory yet. Next, he had to deal with the Element Spirit civilization. The battle against them might take place in the chaos or the other shore. Since no one had spoken yet, he shot the cyan sword radiance at them. Puff, 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 puff. The strike punctured all of their chests, and black flames burned hotly in their wounds. Although such injuries weren't enough to kill them, the black fire still felt like torture. Everyone's faces twisted in pain. However, even though the black fire burned continuously, all of them in the lawless cage endured it silently without yielding. "I only want to recruit more men in the chaos who could be of use to me, but it looks like you are all strong-willed people. Since you refuse to join me, let me send you to perdition." With a murderous glint, the Grand Master of Heaven waved his hand, and the entire lawless cage began to shrink rapidly. The distance between the purple pillars continued to lessen, while the pressure inside the cage increased. Fuxie, the Snake Goddess, and the others still tried hard to resist the black fire, but they had quite a hard time now that the lawless cage was also shrinking. As they became increasingly powerless to resist, the black fire burned more and more wildly on their bodies and brought death closer to them. Buzz! Just then, a golden sword radiance crossed a vast distance and slashed squarely on the lawless cage. The mighty golden sword radiance was powerful enough to go against the Grand Master of Heaven's cyan sword radiance. Its attack rocked the entire lawless cage quite violently, which weakened the cage's restraints. Therefore, the snake goddess and the others inside it had a chance to breathe. Eastern Emperor Tai, the Grand Master of Heaven, raised his head and looked at the figure in the far end of the horizon. He had thought that it would be Othniel who came out of the battleground victoriously, but that was not the case. Chapter 3511, Unexpected Appearance. The real Eastern Emperor Tai was not weak by any means, but he was no match for Othniel. That was why it shocked the Grand Master of Heaven a great deal to see him walking towards them. Fuxi, the real snake goddess, Gerald and Judson also sported expressions of surprise on their faces, while Herbert even bordered on desperation. In a flash, the real Eastern Emperor Tai spiraled into the air and brandished his golden sword radiance. Buzz, 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 buzz. His bloodline-activated swordsmanship was geared to the max as 19 golden long swords were summoned by his side. These golden swords looked illusory and extended far into the distance. Some directly stabbed into the source world, but did not really damage it. A few sensitive creatures felt their hearts palpitate but nothing more. The blades, however, were very solid and even the toughest magic treasure in the chaos could be slashed open by them easily. Buzz. With a shrill, ear-shattering whistle, the 19 golden swords merged into one and immediately slashed down towards the Grand Master of Heaven. At the moment before impact, the light emanated from the blade and formed a golden arc in the air. A terrifying force was released from the sword as the real Eastern Emperor Tai was going to break through the lawless cage and pierce through the Grand Master of Heaven. Fuxi's eyes sparkled in excitement. Eastern Emperor Tai is so powerful. In contrast, the real snake goddess was calm and the real Fuxi sighed slightly. The real Eastern Emperor Tai was by no means weak, but the gap between him and the Grand Master of Heaven was way too big. Even if he pushed that physical body to the limit, his efforts would remain futile. They had no idea how the real Eastern Emperor Tai defeated Othniel, but it would be impossible for him to change the situation now. In the face of such a seemingly devastating attack, the Grand Master of Heaven only snorted as he lifted his own cyan misty sword to resist his oncoming opponent's attack. His sword was fixed and stayed motionless atop his head. Bang! Upon the moment of impact with the cyan misty sword, the real Eastern Emperor Tai's golden sword trembled. However, the cyan misty sword remained motionless. With eyes full of determination, the real Eastern Emperor Tai clenched his hand and lifted his sword to let out a series of slashes upon his opponent. Bang, bang, bang. This golden sword was his strongest Thurgi, but it remained unable to shake the cyan misty sword that kept resisting each attack. During the course of the one-sided struggle, the real Eastern Emperor Tai tried to change the direction of his strikes in an attempt to kill his target but to no avail. All the Grand Master of Heaven did was flicking his finger and blocking each of his pursuer's sword strikes. After 10 strikes, the real Eastern Emperor Tai's sword showed signs of fatigue and the golden light was significantly dimmer than before. I have no idea how you managed to escape Othniel, but since you're brave enough to come at me and court death, then I will fulfill your wish, the Grand Master of Heaven muttered darkly as he went through the purple pillars and headed straight towards the real Eastern Emperor Tai. As soon as he got out of the lawless cage, Herbert immediately tried to gain control. However, the Grand Master of Heaven merely turned around and silenced him with a glare. Soon enough, several purple pillars flashed and suppressed Herbert. Meanwhile, the real Eastern Emperor Tai remained resolute and had no plans to retreat. He continued to wave his dimmed golden sword and hacked away at the Grand Master of Heaven. Whoosh! It was a battle of blades as each strike from the real Eastern Emperor Tai was deflected by the Grand Master of Heaven's cyan misty sword. In the blink of an eye, the latter appeared in front of his opponent, slashing at him with his cyan misty sword in order to conclude this fight. Go to perdition, the Grand Master of Heaven shouted. However, in the split second that he was about to deal his blow, the Grand Master of Heaven saw a look of ridicule on the real Eastern Emperor Tai's face with no trace of cowardice whatsoever. How could someone make such an expression in the face of death? Momentarily distracted by his confusion, the Grand Master of Heaven was caught off guard when he felt a piercing sensation at the back of his neck that soon escalated into indescribable pain. He turned around on reflex and saw a huge, ugly, gorilla-like monster in front of him. Idiot off! He screamed just as the monster was about to hug him. His reaction was extremely fast and he was able to predict what would happen next. In an effort to ward off the beast, the Grand Master of Heaven held his cyan misty sword in front of him and was ready to pierce through the oncoming monster's chest. If this monster dared to come closer, he would surely cut it in half with the cyan misty sword. Of course, any regular creature would immediately give up, But Zen was considerably all-powerful in this form. 2 ribs suddenly drilled out of his chest, strange, solid and metallic-looking. At the end of each rib was a small split that held the cyan misty sword at bay. The strange sight made the Grand Master of Heaven's eyes widen in shock. It was as if the 2 ribs had formed a customized sword rack for his blade. "What is that?" he cursed in disgust. It was half amazing yet also half disturbing. While he was frozen in shock, Zen took the chance to wrap his arms around him. At the same time, a few more ribs jutted out of his body and pierced through the Grand Master of Heaven. Puff, puff, puff. These ribs were akin to the sharpest sword and thus were able to pierce through the Grand Master of Heaven's flesh with no resistance at all. All the onlookers in the lawless cage could do was to stare at this scene with looks of disbelief on their faces. Who was that? Where in the world did this monster come from? Is fate smiling down on us and sending us help? Everyone knew that their fortunes had just been reversed by the sudden appearance of this white-haired monster. Ever since the battle began, Fuxi and the others had no time to pay attention to Zen. They thought that even if Zen was able to fuse with the ancestry-level bloodline, he was still weak compared to the Chaos Ancient Gods and there was no way he'd be able to contend with them. That was the reason why they asked him to guard the Pear Hill with Yan. Who would have thought Zen would be their unlikely trump card in the form of this white-haired monster? As the Grand Master of Heaven was trapped within Zen's arms, he forcibly tried to struggle, just as Othniel had done. His figure constantly shifted between blurry and solid, yet he remained in Zen's hold. Soon enough, he came up with the same escape method Othniel had used and turned himself into countless minimum spaces to escape. There was a sour expression on the Grand Master of Heaven's face as he shifted into countless minimum spaces, since it was, after all, Othniel's ability that helped him escape. He glared hard at the monster. "Who are you?" he asked coldly. It wasn't just him. Fuxi, the real snake goddess, Gerald, Judson, and even Herbert wanted to know who this monster was. There was no powerful beast that existed in the chaos like the one in front of them, save perhaps for the Chaos Ancient God, Lamont. Chapter 3512, Breaking the Lawless Cage. Even before the battle began, Zen's body had already started mutating, and the snake goddess had noticed it. When the huge monster suddenly appeared, she had a hunch but was still a little uncertain. The gap between the monster and Zen was just too great. For one, Zen's wild god body was only a little over 4 million feet tall. However, this monster's body was over 10 million feet tall. It was more than twice of Zen's size. "It's a pity that you dodged it," Zen said with an unpleasant sound coming from his chest. The voice had a strong penetrating power that would send shivers on one's spine, and there was also a bewitching power in it. Almost all living things would instinctively feel fear and disgust towards Zen when they heard his voice. Even those powerful Eternal Realm Masters were of no exception. "Who are you?" the Grand Master of Heaven asked again. He instinctively felt that this monster would be difficult to deal with. If it was possible, he wouldn't take the chance to fight it. "This is impossible. There is no such existence in the chaos." The captain of the black ship was in denial as the monster didn't give a direct answer. It was the black ship's duty to gather news and information in the chaos for the Nihility race. If the captain missed accounting such a powerful existence, it would be a grave dereliction of his duty. The captain was so puzzled. If the monster was really from the chaos, there was no way that it would just appear out of nowhere. "Is this creature from the other shore then?" he thought. Such a bother. What? As the Grand Master of Heaven was still conversing with the captain of the black ship, the monster secretly turned and gave a hint to Eastern Emperor Tai. With that, Eastern Emperor Tai condensed his golden sword again and took the opportunity to hack it towards the Grand Master of Heaven's head while his guard was down. However, the Grand Master of Heaven was too strong to fall for a sneak attack. With just a flip of his cyan misty sword, he deflected the incoming sword strike. But what he didn't know was that it was just a diversion created by the white-haired monster. While the Grand Master of Heaven was busy with the attacks from Eastern Emperor Tai, he didn't notice that the monster had already disappeared. The next moment, it emerged inside the lawless cage, next to Fuxi and the snake goddess. Herbert was the one who created the lawless cage. It looked ordinary on the outside, but it was extremely powerful. Even Chaos Ancient Gods like Gerald, Judson, and Herbert himself, were completely suppressed by the lawless cage. With the sudden appearance of the white-haired monster, they thought that it might have the chance to defeat the Grand Master of Heaven. Everyone who was held captive inside the lawless cage thought that the monster could bring the situation a favorable turn. However, to their dismay, they didn't expect that the monster would enter the lawless cage on its own volition. "Why are you here? Are you out of your mind?" Fuxi's eyes widened as he stared at the white-haired monster. He wanted to curse as he discerned that the monster just made a seemingly stupid move. On the other hand, both the Grand Master of Heaven and the captain of the black ship didn't understand what just happened but were overjoyed by the unexpected turn of events. No one expected that the monster would throw itself into the lawless cage. No matter how powerful a person was, their strength would be greatly weakened if they were trapped inside the lawless cage. As a result, the Grand Master of Heaven could do anything to them as he wished. He initially thought that the white-haired monster was going to be troublesome, but he didn't expect it to be so reckless. Now, almost all his powerful opponents were already inside the cage. Only one remained outside. Meanwhile, a sharp light flashed in the eyes of Eastern Emperor Tai. A line of undecipherable Sanskrit words flowed down his face like tears. Buzz, buzz. As the Sanskrit words glinted, his strength and speed immediately surged. Right now, he was the only one who could move freely and take on the Grand Master of Heaven. At the same time, the Grand Master of Heaven also increased the aura gushing from his body. This instantly made Eastern Emperor Tai heighten his senses and defenses. Under the constant activation of his bloodline power, the golden sword emitted a blinding light again. Meanwhile, in the lawless cage, the black fire that enveloped several parts of the bodies of the snake goddess, Fuxi, Gerald, and Judson hadn't been extinguished. While the Grand Master of Heaven was dealing with the white-haired monster earlier, the suppression force of the cage had somewhat weakened. Therefore, they were able to at least stop the fire from expanding further. However, now that the Grand Master of Heaven was just dealing with Eastern Emperor Tai, the suppression force of the lawless cage had increased greatly again. Given the speed and the intensity of the black fire, it wouldn't be long before it devoured all those who were affected. At this crucial moment, the white-haired monster suddenly reached out and grabbed the purple pillars of the cage. The purple pillars of the lawless cage were supposed to be indestructible from the inside. Even with the combined powers and efforts of the two Chaos Ancient Gods, Fuxi, and the Snake Goddess, the purple pillars didn't budge at all. Upon seeing what the monster was doing, all of the prisoners inside laughed bitterly. Herbert, who was also watching, shook his head. However, a few moments after the white-haired monster grabbed the pillars, the purple light on their surface instantly dimmed and gradually turned into a gray light, which spread rapidly throughout the entire cage. What's happening? Hey, what is this? Are you breaking the lawless cage? Everyone's eyes widened and their jaws dropped. In front of them, the seemingly invincible lawless cage was collapsing like a fragile sculpture. Herbert, who was the creator of the lawless cage, was the most surprised. As he comprehended the mechanism of the lawless cage from the power of truth, he knew that only the outer layer of the cage was vulnerable. That was why the sword attack of Eastern Emperor Tai from before made the lawless cage tremble. But there was no way to deliberately destroy it from the inside. Or so they thought, until they witnessed how the white-haired monster destroyed it with its bare hands. The Grand Master of Heaven was about to go all out on capturing Eastern Emperor Tai when he suddenly perceived that something wrong was going on. As he turned at the direction of the lawless cage, his face grew pale at what he saw. The purple light of the lawless cage had turned to gray. It seemed like it was eroded by some kind of opposing energy. What did you? Victory was almost in the grasp of the Grand Master of Heaven. Once he killed all the people inside the cage, the problem in the chaos would be solved. The only thing that he needed to focus afterward was the war on the other shore. However, all his plans crumbled when this unknown monster suddenly appeared and destroyed the lawless cage effortlessly. The Grand Master of Heaven was quick-witted. He didn't want to believe his suspicion, but it was the only explanation. Dang it, you are Zen. Previously, Zen had used a similar ability, and only he possessed such an unusual and powerful skill in the entire chaos. Fuxi, who had just escaped from the lawless cage, glared at the white-haired monster when he heard the cry of the Grand Master of Heaven. Wait, are you really Zen? What kind of ability is that? No offense, but you completely look like an ugly monster. The Snake Goddess was just calm. Gerald and Judson also had a hunch earlier. When they saw how the monster easily crushed the lawless cage, they instantly knew the identity of the white-haired monster. Yes, it's me. Haha, you don't have to emphasize the ugly part. Zen had no intention of hiding his identity. Well, given your remarkable strength, your appearance doesn't really matter, Fuxi said as he stared at Zen's body with admiration. Although it was weird, every part of it was useful and suitable for killing and fighting. Herbert, are you seeing this? As a zillion creatures have been born in these over 1,000 chaotic eras, there are always some powerful beings that would appear no matter what. Now, do you still want to be part of the other side? Gerald pointed out as he tried to persuade Herbert. Herbert chose to follow the purge way, though he was a little uncertain. The ancient and powerful element spirit civilization made him think that it would be much easier to complete the purge way. However, after seeing what Zen did today, Herbert began to harbor doubts and have a little change of perspective. He thought that perhaps, it was destined that this round of chaos became different from the rest. Herbert kept quiet and didn't reply. As a chaos ancient god, he didn't have the luxury to easily change his mind. But for now, since he was released, the only certain thing was the Grand Master of Heaven was his enemy. Chapter 3513, The Foundation. The Grand Master of Heaven had worked hard to come up with the situation. But only within a short period, it was ruined. The people who had been controlled had obtained their freedom, resulting in him facing 7 opponents including Fuxi, the real snake goddess, Gerald, Judson, Zen, Eastern Emperor Tai, and Herbert. They were all top masters of the eternal realm, except for the 3 chaos ancient gods, Judson, Herbert and Gerald, and Zen was even more remarkable. As for the Grand Master of Heaven, he only had one helper, the captain of the black ship. In the face of these powerful masters, the captain could not do anything to them. When it came to real strength, he would be at a disadvantage in the battle with Fuxi, far inferior to the real Fuxi. I made the correct judgment when we were in the Grand Plain stage, the Grand Master of Heaven said, staring at Zen with confidence. He believed that Zen deserved the Nihility race's great deal of effort to win him over, so he took action in person. Unfortunately, neither he nor Claire had succeeded. Claire and the Grand Master of Heaven both had sharp intuition. They were determined that they had to get Zen. He could either be destroyed or become a huge hit in trouble if they couldn't get him. Therefore, the only purpose that the Black Ship and the Bering race attacked the Oneness Sky Palace after Zen entered the Eternal Scroll painting was to take him. However, contrary to the wishes of the Black Ship and the Bering race, the situation had developed to this point after the 3 forces took action. It was beyond the Grand Master of Heaven's expectations. It had only been a short while since Zen returned, but he was able to kill him. What kind of bloodline did Zen get? Even the origin-level bloodline shouldn't be so powerful in a short time. It doesn't matter whether your judgment is right or wrong, because you can't affect the situation, Zen responded, dismissing the Grand Master of Heaven's certainty. There were 2 choices for the Grand Master of Heaven at the moment. He could either abandon the descending ring and escape back to the other shore, or stay where he was and fight to death. The Nihility race didn't suffer too much loss. Returning to the other shore was the best choice for the Grand Master of Heaven. He could wait for the next opportunity, and when the element spirit civilization fought with the Pear Hill, he could take the chance to achieve his goal. However, he was still a ruthless master who had fought with the ice spirit for several hundred chaotic eras. After he heard Zen's remark, a fierce light flashed through his eyes, and his lips curled into a sinister smile. Ha ha ha, it's so ridiculous, the Grand Master of Heaven said condescendingly. He pointed at Gerald, saying, do you really think that you will be able to reverse the situation just because there is someone like Zen in this round of chaos? Do you think that the finale way, which could not be completed for over 1,000 chaotic eras, could be completed this time? His voice resonated with sarcasm as he heard what Gerald had just said to Herbert. The only fate of the chaos is to remain desolate forever. This chaos and the other tens of thousands of worlds could never escape from it, including you. The Grand Master of Heaven sneered as he waved his hand at the crowd. The faces of Gerald, Judson, Herbert and Fuxi were consumed with shock as they heard this declaration. However, the real Eastern Emperor Tai, Zen, and the real Snake Goddess stayed calm, unswayed by his words. The Grand Master of Heaven had great insight and sensed the wave of emotions crashing over everyone. However, he wondered why Zen, the real Eastern Emperor Tai, and the real Snake Goddess seemed unbothered. The other tens of thousands of worlds. Do you mean that there are similar worlds outside the chaos that have been destroyed? Fuxi asked in disbelief. Not long ago, Fuxi knew that there was an abstruse energy world outside the chaos, but he didn't know that there were tens of thousands of other worlds similar to the chaos and that all of them had faced destruction. With your thoughts and intelligence, you simply couldn't understand what happened. The Grand Master of Heaven glared at Fuxi indifferently. What do you mean? Fuxi stared at him in confusion. As a replicate, Fuxi was not taken seriously by the Grand Master of Heaven. We can't understand. You are exaggerating. The real Snake Goddess glanced at the Grand Master of Heaven, turned around, and explained to Fuxi, the chaos is just a tool to absorb energy. There are tens of thousands of similar worlds outside, and these worlds have provided them with a steady stream of energy. However, they are not united as one. Maybe they have been divided into 2 factions, 3 factions, or even more. When these factions took action against each other, many worlds were destroyed, and only the chaos was left. The element spirit civilization is one of those factions. The real snake goddess pointed at the Grand Master of Heaven. And you have joined the faction that constantly destroys the worlds and have become their puppet, she accused. Fuxi speechlessly stared at the real snake goddess, wondering why this wisp of energy soul knew so much. Gerald, Judson, and Herbert were even more stunned, their eyes widening over what was said. The entire chaos was only a tool for absorbing energy. There were still many similar worlds, but in the end, the finale way had never succeeded. Those worlds had all been destroyed by the nihility race. Every word set their eyes ablaze, like shocking lightning. Zen looked at the real snake goddess, almost seeming to commend her unforeseen intelligence. When Zen returned from the eternal scroll painting and passed through the world of the ultimate cycle, the real snake goddess that was attached to Zen's body had deciphered some special information. Later, he had gained some knowledge from the brush wielder, but the brush wielder had not yet explained everything to him. Neither Zen nor the primeval Lord of Heaven knew whether the chaos was the last remaining world or not. But as soon as the Grand Master of Heaven said those words, the real snake goddess came to this conclusion according to his revelation. It was completely logical, worthy for both Zen's and the primeval Lord of Heaven's admiration. The Grand Master of Heaven didn't expect that the real snake goddess would know so much. The excitement on his face slowly faded into a darker emotion, but he still managed to mock her. So what? My senior fellow disciple has persisted for such a long time, but he hasn't even found out the truth. Now you still want to complete the finale way? It is just wishful thinking. Hearing the Grand Master of Heaven make such remarks of ridicule, the real snake goddess only shrugged it off with a smile. She knew that the brush wielder gave Zen the hope, which meant that there was a chance to complete the finale way. The Grand Master of Heaven was clueless about that. Wait and see if it is just wishful thinking. What I know is you're in a bad situation now. Zen slightly leaned his body forward and disappeared after taking a step. He transformed into a thin thread, spreading towards the Grand Master of Heaven at an extremely fast speed. After seeing Zen do his move, Eastern Emperor Tai, Fuxi, the real snake goddess, and the three Chaos Ancient Gods also took action. The powerful warriors each activated their strength at the same time. Even the huge chaos clouds on the side drifted away slowly as if wanting to keep distance from the battle. There are some powers that are inappropriate for you, the Grand Master of Heaven said with a domineering aura. There are things that you don't qualify to know, and there are also some powers that you cannot resist. In that case, let me show you the foundation of the nihility race. Chapter 3514, The Origin of the Light Region. Raising his cyan misty sword high, the Grand Master of Heaven had a white light column strike him. While the chaos wasn't pitch black, it was rather dim. The eye-catching white light column appeared abruptly, it seemed to purify everything somehow. The moment it appeared, Zen raised his brows. The Great Sanskrit Light. Once Elvinia became a purified being, she mastered the Great Sanskrit Light. Soon after, Zen became a purified being himself and was highly familiar with the Great Sanskrit Light, so he could recognize it at a glance. Was the Grand Master of Heaven also a purified being, then? Zen wondered because the man seemed to be able to release the Great Sanskrit Light at will. But the Great Sanskrit Light could only harm the creatures in the dark region, it was completely useless against the creatures from the light region. The creatures in the chaos weren't afraid of this light in the least. Was it somehow related to the foundation the Grand Master of Heaven mentioned? While Zen had become a purified being, he still hadn't been able to figure out the true relationship between the dark region and the light region. In stage 14, an insect master had told him that their race's ancestor had gone to the dark sky, something that couldn't be found at stage 14. Once Zen climbed up to the blooming jade stage, he learned that the dark region was under the element spirit civilization's control. So was the light region controlled by the nihility race, Zen wondered. I don't care what kind of power you have. I'll smash you to pieces. Taking the lead, Fuxi waved his hand from where he stood. The 8 diagrams marks weren't imprinted on the Grand Master of Heaven's body, but on the surface of the column of the Great Sanskrit Light. And so Fuxi began waving his hands at top speed. Boom, boom, boom. In an instant, Fuxi unleashed countless palm prints that exploded along with the 8 diagrams marks. The force they released was nothing short of terrifying. But the Great Sanskrit Light column wasn't damaged in the least. It had managed to resist every single one of Fuxi's attacks. Well, Fuxi seemed desperate at this point. He had always been proud to be the strongest warrior in the chaos. But just now, he utterly failed after pushing himself to his absolute limit. The seemingly weak light column was impenetrable. This indicated just how great the gap between him and the Grand Master of Heaven was. It's your turn, Fuxi murmured to his real self that was hiding within his body. Once he requested his real self to release his physical body, his real self had done as promised. After all, the latter was merely an energy soul. It was impossible for it to forcibly occupy Fuxie's physical body. But Fuxie's own strength was far inferior to that of his real self. He was well aware that it was more suitable for his real self to fight in this sort of battle. And so Fuxie's real self obtained control over the body once again. That's the purest light in the light region. It's a method that only the purified beings have. The light shouldn't be so strong. As Fuxie's real self was observing, Herbert rushed up first. While Gerald and Judson also hated the Grand Master of Heaven, Herbert was demon-bent on killing him after being previously betrayed by the man. Crack, 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 a circular, serrated bone plate grew upon Herbert's back. As it spun, several slender bones began extending from it. The slender bones then extended rapidly. While they looked like Herbert's wings, they didn't extend backward as normal wings did. Instead, they extended forward, forming a great circular space in front of Herbert, entrapping the Grand Master of Heaven within. I have many kinds of cages. The lawless cage is merely one of them. This bone-corroding cage is my greatest masterpiece. Seeing the Grand Master of Heaven trapped in his cage, Herbert was overjoyed. The bone-corroding cage was a terrifying place of killing. Herbert had always been rather strange, but among the 6 Chaos Ancient Gods, he boasted about the most profound study of the truth power. Once the bone-corroding cage covered the Grand Master of Heaven, transparent bone membrane quickly appeared on either side of the bones, transforming the entire cage into an oval sphere. Soon after, yellow mist rose within the cage, a mist that could corrode all tangible materials. Up until then, all things it had touched corroded in an instant. And so the yellow mist began intertwining with the white light like water being poured into a boiling pot of oil. Sizzle! Under the violent reaction, the yellow mist rolled crazily within the cage. But the light column was slightly shaking. Instead of dispersing, it neutralized the yellow mist, forming a layer of harmless black powder at the very bottom of the cage. It doesn't work. Herbert's eyes widened. While the bone-corroding cage couldn't kill the Grand Master of Heaven, he figured it would do him some damage at the very least. But the seemingly ordinary light column was indestructible. Let me try. Judson flew up to the Grand Master of Heaven's level. A silver spear appeared in his grip as he stretched out his hand. Saint-killing spear. It was not merely Judson's theurgy, but also the most powerful material he had ever created. The moment the spear was thrown out, it turned into 10 identical spears, all shifting into streaks of silver light that poured down on the light column. Da, 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 with some cracking sounds, the spear broke into pieces. But Judson had expected the spear to shatter. It wasn't particularly sturdy, after all. It was brittle. But much to his surprise, the spear failed to even pierce through the light column. His strongest theurgy seemed to be a mere joke before the Grand Master of Heaven. As a normally aloof and arrogant Chaos Ancient God, he found the fact was hard to face. In the light column, the Grand Master of Heaven still held the cyan misty sword. It greedily sucked the white light. This white light formed several flowing light spots on the sword's surface as infinite power gathered within it. It's useless. You can't penetrate the power of the Foundation, said the Grand Master of Heaven proudly. Just then, Zen suddenly appeared beside the light column. He stared at it from nearby and said, "This seems to be the great Sanskrit light. I am a purified being as well, but as far as I know, the great Sanskrit light works only on creatures of the dark region." "You have no more than a superficial knowledge of light," snorted the other. It was clear that he didn't take Zen seriously in spite of their shared status. Really, Zen paid no mind to the other's attitude and asked further, "So the power of the Foundation you mentioned is also based on the great Sanskrit light?" "Yes. So what?" Realizing that Zen was fishing for information, the Grand Master of Heaven glared at him. The latter only smiled faintly. "If you don't want to say it, then forget it. The light column is powerful, but can it block me?" As he spoke, he reached out, pushing at the column's surface. While the Grand Master of Heaven was highly confident in the Foundation's power, his heart couldn't help but race in worry as he saw Zen's palm push on it. "This guy is just too strange, I'm not sure if," he thought to himself. When Zen's palm touched the light column, the bloodline in his body began fluctuating chaotically. The ancestry-level bloodline needed to change its very structure each time it restrained the external energy. But this time, the fluctuation was far more violent. Chapter 3515, Join Hands. Theoretically, the 4 quadrants of the ancestry-level bloodline contained all the abilities. From the abstruse energy world to the secondary worlds, the abilities were always in the range of these 4 quadrants. The entire ancestry-level bloodline could restrain any energy perfectly. Zen firmly believed in this even though he couldn't completely control the ancestry-level bloodline. After all, from the eternal divine courtyard, the 4 origin-level bloodlines below the eternal divine courtyard, and the passageway of the eternal scroll painting to the chaos, this point had already been proven right anywhere. However, when faced with the great Sanskrit light, the ancestry-level bloodline proved ineffective for the first time. Under the violent fluctuations of the bloodline, Zen did not find any effective restraining ability. Soon after, he felt a storm within his body, and his organs violently trembled in reaction. Instantly, his arms changed again. The 2 arms that were covered in white hair began to contract. At the same time, the hair shed and the bones softened. Just as the 2 arms transformed into pure muscles, round holes appeared on the muscles' surfaces, expanding and eventually turning into suckers. Are these octopus tentacles? Zen asked, shocked to see how his arms had changed. Although the transformation caused no pain and was an advantage, Zen still found it terrifying. Click, click, click. The 2 tentacles flailed around as they were completely out of Zen's control. Then, they drooped across the light pillar and began to wiggle. Seeing Zen's worry and helplessness, the Grand Master of Heaven sighed in relief. Initially, when Zen broke the fishing drum, the Grand Master of Heaven was confused profoundly. Not long after, he concluded that Zen must have obtained the ability by chance to restrain the space theurgy. That was why the triangular world of Othniel and his fishing drum couldn't restrain him. However, just now, he saw with his own eyes that Zen broke the lawless cage of Herbert. This had never been done before, so he was bewildered again. Could this mean that Zen's bloodline restrained different energies? If so, why couldn't Zen restrain the great Sanskrit light? This relieved the Grand Master of Heaven. Knowing that an eternal realm warrior could not break the power of the foundation brought him a dose of hope. As long as he was the only one who could obtain the Sanskrit light body, he could kill everyone before him. However, he was going to spare Zen because he wanted to study the man's secrets. Just as the Grand Master of Heaven was gloating, one of the tentacles of Zen began to suck intensely along the light wall. You want to break the light wall in this way? The Grand Master of Heaven asked with much spite. Gradually, small black dots appeared on the surface of the pure white light. These dots expanded and eventually formed small holes. This tentacle is absorbing the light wall. The Grand Master of Heaven's eyes widened. The protective light wall formed by the great Sanskrit light might have seemed ordinary, but little did people know that the method of directly forming the wall with energy was very special. Because it was so rare, the Grand Master of Heaven did not anticipate that it could be destroyed. This left the Grand Master of Heaven speechless. Then anger rose within him as he hated Zen even more. He thought that Zen would be the biggest threat to the Nihility race if he was not killed at once. On behalf of the Nihility race, the Grand Master of Heaven saw the element spirit civilization as the race's greatest threat originally. The 39 elite human warriors that were trapped for so many years could only be considered as trouble. The Grand Master of Heaven believed that they could be ignored. Now, the Grand Master of Heaven saw Zen as a major threat. The wall has been broken. After the tentacle moved away, Zen finally caught a glimpse of the holes on the light wall. Because he was over 10 million feet tall, the holes were rather small to him when in fact, they were all over 100,000 feet wide. Since you are in such a hurry to die, I will give you a hand. The Grand Master of Heaven raged and released the surging killing intent. Just then, the sword in his hand turned white, and then the color spread throughout his whole body. Eventually, the Grand Master of Heaven was covered from head to toe by the white light. Whoosh! He slashed his sword and aimed for Zen's head. The solid light wall did not stop him from slashing. With one roaring sound, the white sword blade was close enough to swallow Zen. However, Zen was a smart warrior. He chose to retreat the moment he saw the sword coming down upon him. Meanwhile, because the tentacle was controlled by the ancestry-level bloodline, it was not in sync with all Zen's movements. It continued to suck at the light wall. As Zen's body backed away sharply, his arm was dragged and extended for millions of feet. It was hit by the white light sword. Puff! Just like that, the tentacle broke. And blood gushed out from the wound. The ancestry-level bloodline had its thoughts. While some of the blood splashed out, some also went directly inside the broken arm. The broken tentacle wriggled like a big worm, crawling along the light wall to the other side. The Grand Master of Heaven could not care less about the tentacle. When he saw that Zen retreated, he followed closely behind. Where are you going? In a moment, the Grand Master of Heaven launched his second strike. However, just as the sword was swung, Judson suddenly appeared at the side. He pointed at the blade in the Grand Master of Heaven's hand and numerous cobwebs quickly appeared. These webs were extremely thick and layered on top of one another, making it a great obstruction to the Grand Master of Heaven's attacks. The Grand Master of Heaven attempted to shake the webs off but was unsuccessful. At the same time, the shadow of Snake Goddess quickly descended and merged with the Grand Master of Heaven. If any ordinary Eternal Realm warrior was fused with the shadow of Snake Goddess, they would have been eroded by the energy within it. The shadow of the real Snake Goddess had more power than that of the Snake Goddess in this chaotic era. However, the Grand Master of Heaven had transformed into the Sanskrit light body, and the shadow of Snake Goddess was completely unable to corrode the white light. With no intention to kill the Grand Master of Heaven, the Snake Goddess tried to temporarily trap him. The formless snake shackle. Meanwhile, Herbert also activated his bloodline power to utilize the shackling method. 4 indistinct shadows of snake-shaped shackles appeared on the hands and feet of the Grand Master of Heaven, coiling around his wrists and ankles. Fuxi appeared in front of the Grand Master of Heaven. He lifted his arm and launched a palm strike at the Grand Master of Heaven. What seemed like an ordinary palm strike vibrated for over 10,000 times as it came into contact with the chest of the Grand Master of Heaven. Break the body. Fuxi's goal was not to kill the Grand Master of Heaven but to weaken his defense of his Sanskrit light body as much as possible. Next, Gerald appeared. He waved his tail and stabbed right at the center of the Grand Master of Heaven's chest, exactly where Fuxi's palm hit. Gerald's strikes were so powerful that even Claire had been killed in his hands by the poison of decomposition. If the Grand Master of Heaven was pierced deeply enough, he would die the same way Claire did. Chapter 3516, Press. More than half of Gerald's bright-colored tail needle was impaled into the Sanskrit light body of the Grand Master of Heaven. The tail needle was about 300,000 feet long, and about 2/3 of the total length was drilled deep into the body. Ideally, it was already enough to break the Sanskrit light body. Nice work, Gerald. There's no way he could resist the poison of decomposition. Finish him. Everyone yelled and was full of expectations. Technically, the poison of decomposition was not a poison, but a kind of energy that could destroy things at a molecular level. Supposedly, no one had a good way to withstand it. Just when everyone thought that they had finally succeeded, the expression on Gerald's face gradually changed. What is this? There is no physical body. The Grand Master of Heaven sneered as he finished Gerald's sentence. Everyone clearly witnessed how Gerald's needle pierced into the Sanskrit light body of the Grand Master of Heaven. However, the body was empty. It turned out that it was not a real physical body. So what? That doesn't matter, Gerald retorted, trying to still sound confident. The poison of decomposition was supposed to destroy everything, including energies and souls. That was why Gerald was still confident that they could take the Grand Master of Heaven down. Soon, a black mass leaked at the place where the needle stabbed the body. Like a thick dripping ink, it began to diffuse but soon stopped. In just a matter of seconds, the all-conquering poison of decomposition was subdued and lost its effect. Are you done with your childish games? The Grand Master of Heaven shouted contemptuously. Then, at his bidding, his long sword emerged, shrouded in pure bright lights. He waved his sword and a white sword arc instantly appeared in the void. The sword arc was lashing in the air at such an incredible speed. Upon seeing this, Gerald quickly pulled his tail and retrieved it from the body of the Grand Master of Heaven. However, there was not enough time. Splat! Gerald's tail was slashed, and a stream of green blood gushed out immediately. The Grand Master of Heaven raised his sword and aimed at Gerald again. The sharp lights coming from it seemed to be able to illuminate the entire chaos. This time, as the Grand Master of Heaven threw his second strike, Gerald's reaction was quicker. He was able to use the Grand Teleportation in order to avoid the incoming attack. Humph! What an annoying insect! The Grand Master of Heaven was going all out. He intended to do anything and release everything in his arsenal just to bring down all his opponents. With that, he prepared his next set of attacks. Suddenly, the space around him solidified. He dragged the white shadows of light and instantly appeared in front of Fuxi. Die, weaklings! Fuxi was caught off guard. The white arc of light quickly rushed towards his head. So fast, I won't make it. His body froze for a few seconds before it could react. Compared to the Grand Master of Heaven's lightning speed, everyone else seemed to move so slow. Realizing that he couldn't dodge the sword strike, Fuxi turned his body around and sacrificed his legs. Splat! Fuxi's legs were immediately cut clean and blood spurted out. There was no sign that the Grand Master of Heaven was stopping. He quickly launched another sword strike, with the intent of finishing Fuxi off this time. Not on my watch. Myriad heavy water. Judson outflanked the Grand Master of Heaven. With a clap of his hands, a drop of water suddenly appeared. The droplet of water instantly expanded to a size large enough to envelop the Grand Master of Heaven. Now, condense. The water might look just like an ordinary one, but it was extremely dense. As the Grand Master of Heaven was sealed in it, his movements were immediately restrained. Only then did Fuxi have the chance to escape from the sword strike. Then, Gerald quickly approached Fuxi. He stretched out a pincer and gently patted it on Fuxi's wounds. 2 dark green forces of truth were injected into the wounds at once, making his broken legs begin regenerating. However, the myriad heavy water was only able to seal the Grand Master of Heaven for a few seconds. After a while, the Grand Master of Heaven's body suddenly trembled, and the myriad heavy water instantly broke apart, splashing in all directions. Just when the Grand Master of Heaven was about to continue chasing Fuxi, several spores, the size of a fist, suddenly appeared on the surface of his Sanskrit light body. The spores quickly latched to his body. The roots wrapped around him and so were the vines that sprouted. Apparently, before Judson launched the myriad heavy water, Gerald had discreetly stuffed the spores into it. When the Grand Master of Heaven was enveloped by the myriad heavy water, the spores quickly attached to his body. The thick golden vines were extremely tough. Even the Grand Master of Heaven struggled hard before he was able to break some of them. However, more and more vines wrapped around him. The Grand Master of Heaven admitted that these Chaos Ancient Gods and Eternal Realm Masters were formidable. Even if he was omnipotent, he was still hindered by their tenacious skills and methods. We're not done. Slaughter Prison. Herbert, who was now on the side of the Pear Hill, activated his other Thurgy. In a flash, 6 lightning-like columns began to take shape around the Grand Master of Heaven. However, just before the Slaughter Prison was about to be completed, a snow-white hand reached out from within the golden vines, and a finger pointed at Herbert. Suddenly, a light emerged in front of Herbert. He was so busy activating his bloodline power to set up the Slaughter Prison that he didn't notice the light. Suddenly, the light expanded, and that was the only time that Herbert noted it. However, it was too late when Herbert noticed it. The white light instantly formed a sturdy space that trapped Herbert within. Herbert realized that his life was in great danger. He did all he could in order to break the light column. However, the light column was so indestructible that even the ancestry-level bloodline was not able to destroy it. Previously, it had to produce tentacles to absorb the column bit by bit. So Herbert, who only used brute force to break it, didn't make it budge even a little. Crash! Suddenly, an unusual noise resounded from within the light column. Herbert's movements were stopped as if there was an extremely powerful force that was pressing on his body. The downward pressure in the light column continued to grow stronger and stronger, crushing Herbert's body little by little. After a short while, Herbert's body was tightly pressed at the bottom of the light column. Crash! Crack! Herbert's bones began to break and his body was starting to collapse. The pressure continued to increase. Everyone just stood there, watching his agony as they also couldn't do anything about the light column. At this point, Herbert couldn't even struggle or make a sound anymore. His eyes revealed a look of total helplessness and misery. Splat! Herbert's entire body exploded and was completely crushed. His huge body, which was millions of feet tall, was reduced into a puddle of blood. Everyone couldn't believe that a dignified Chaos Ancient God could die in this miserable way. Gerald, Judson, Fuxi, and the Snake Goddess didn't avert their eyes from the scene. Instead, their faces darkened and their eyes were filled with rage. At this time, the Grand Master of Heaven had finally removed all the golden vines that were wrapped on his body. There was a smirk on his face, yet an extreme murderous intent was oozing from his eyes. He was getting impatient because his real enemy wasn't there. Originally, he did not intend to use too much of his foundation power, but these people gave him a hard time. With that, he decided to handle them using a fiercer method. Are you mad? Well, you ask for it. Now, I'll kill you one by one. Gerald became instantly aware when the Grand Master of Heaven pointed at his direction. He knew immediately that something bad was about to happen. He quickly tried to flee, but the light column was already forming before he could even move from his position. You're the next one to die, the Grand Master of Heaven said coldly. Then, the pressure inside the light column suddenly increased. Instantly, Gerald's body was pressed at the bottom. Chapter 3517, Pressing Forward. The miserable death which Herbert had suffered was still lingering on everyone's mind. Trapped and unable to escape, Gerald was obviously about to end up the same. Fuxi, the Snake Goddess and Judson were becoming anxious now. Come on, let's destroy this light column. How? It's not going to be so easy to destroy it. We have to try. I'm afraid that Gerald won't be able to hold on for any more than 30 seconds. Although they knew that the light column was almost completely invulnerable, they still had to try. Therefore, they launched their attacks in unison, trying to destroy the light column that had trapped Gerald. Even under their attacks, the pressure in the light column increased sharply, and the hard shell on the surface of Gerald's body began to emit cracking sounds. Countless cracks spread out, like lines of minuscule bugs crawling over his body. Gerald himself also knew how powerful the light column was. Trapped inside, he had to try and make an effort to save himself since no one else could do so. Buzz! A green-colored light began to leak out from the cracks. The Grand Master of Heaven felt the strong life energy that was contained within the light column with a look of contempt on his face. Gerald was a chaos ancient god who had mastered the truth of life. However, it was impossible for him to use that power to repair his body. Don't try to struggle, it is useless, the Grand Master of Heaven sneered. And as soon as his words finished, the squeezing force in the light column doubled suddenly. Crack, 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 with a wispy, cracking sound, Gerald's shell was suddenly broken completely. Under the irresistible pressure, the tissues in his body began to bleed profusely, and his huge and fragile compound eyes exploded outside. However, the truth power surrounding him did not try to repair his body. It could not. Instead, it was transforming his body. The truth was, even if it did try, it was useless to repair the broken shell. The shell was just a broken defense mechanism. It was not suitable for such a high-pressure environment. The truth power was instead growing a thin layer of tissue over the hard shell. The tissue was flat and weirdly thin, as if it were made of countless pieces of paper. This was the only visible change on the surface of Gerald's body. At the same time, several more changes were taking place inside him. The squeezed body tissue was quickly being transformed by the truth power. Gerald's height was being reduced constantly. Finally, he became completely flat. In fact, that was what he wanted to do. In a short while, the originally scorpion-shaped Gerald had turned into a thin pie. This was a highly powerful move. Some fishes in the deep sea had to bear intense seawater pressure all year round, which had evolved their bodies into flat shapes. However, they needed millions of years to evolve, but Gerald had done this in an instant. A green light flickered on the side of his flat body, and a pair of slender eyes grew to observe everything around him. What the heck? The Grand Master of Heaven was confused now. Herbert had also been crushed into a meat pie just now, and therefore the Grand Master of Heaven hadn't paid much attention to the change in Gerald's body. But the strong life energy that had leaked out could not repair Gerald's body, which had surprised him a bit. Maybe the repair speed was not as fast as the squeezing speed. Therefore, he had not thought much about it. And yet, after a few seconds, Gerald still had a lot of life energy left and there wasn't much damage to him. When the Grand Master of Heaven realized what had happened, he sneered, "Your desire to survive is strong. In this form, your pressure-bearing ability has increased by at least 6 times. But that is still in vain." Once he had finished speaking, his palm emitted a strong white light. From the way he was utilizing his strength, the power of the foundation seemed to be inexhaustible. The squeezing force in the light column continued to increase even now. Goo goo. Still being squeezed continuously, Gerald's body became more and more flat, and his slender eyes revealed a sad expression. Since the pressure was explosively increasing even now, it was going to be difficult for him to resist for too long. Boom, boom, boom. Outside the light column, Judson, Fuxi and the snake goddess were still attacking it with all kinds of methods and moves, but the outer wall of the light column was still totally intact. "Where is Zen?" Judson cried among the battle. He was placing his hope on Zen. Just now, after Zen had dodged the sword strike of the Grand Master of Heaven, he seemed to have disappeared. Even Judson didn't know his whereabouts since he had the power to teleport himself anywhere and everywhere without a trace. At Judson's words, a thin thread suddenly appeared in the void. And out of nowhere, Zen appeared. And when he was finally visible, they saw that his entire body had changed greatly. In addition to the terrifying and strange head he had already developed, his limbs had turned into over 100 tentacles, which were covered with over 10,000 circular suckers. Now, Zen no longer resembled a human from any angle. Instead, he looked like an octopus. The moment he appeared, he placed his limbs on the light column, and the suckers began absorbing the great Sanskrit light without a moment's hesitation. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Black patches quickly appeared on the surface of the originally indestructible light column. As the light column became more and more fragile through Zen's sucking, Zen pulled at it hard. Splash! The light column suddenly collapsed like a large structure made of water, and the pressure inside was instantly released. Gerald's pie-like body fell down rapidly like a heavy hammer. After escaping death, Gerald regained his life energy once again. His body tissue, outer defensive shell, and even his tail, which had disappeared, recovered at a speed visible to the naked eye. The Grand Master of Heaven looked at the octopus-like Zen with a cold expression in his eyes. Previously, it had taken Zen a long time to break the light column, but now, he was powerful enough to easily break the column. This was after he had disappeared for just a little while. Such a speed of growth in strength was unimaginable. Zen was omnipotent now. An opponent with power of this magnitude was going to be extremely tricky to deal with. Whoosh! Dragging over 100 tentacles around him, Zen suddenly disappeared once more, turning into a thin line and rushing towards the Grand Master of Heaven. The Grand Master of Heaven felt threatened at this sight. If he were to be trapped by Zen's tentacles, his Sanskrit light body would be absorbed soon and he would be dead. As he retreated rapidly, a blue light flashed in his eyes. Once he had located Zen, he reached out his hand and grabbed at something in the air. With a buzzing sound, a light column materialized and covered Zen. As Zen's tentacles absorbed the wall of the light column for a while, the wall was broken down once again. The light column was able to hinder Zen for just a single second. However, the Grand Master of Heaven didn't have any other way to deal with Zen as of now. Therefore, as soon as the light column was broken, he summoned yet another one. The light columns kept on materializing one after another and this bought him some time. Splash, 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 all the light columns were broken by Zen. If one observed carefully, the suckers on his tentacles were subtly changing shape during the whole process. In the beginning, the suckers had been circular, but now they had slowly evolved into a diamond-shaped structure. That way, they could absorb the great Sanskrit light much more efficiently. The speed at which they could break the light columns was increasing with every strike, which left the Grand Master of Heaven flabbergasted. Gerald, who was quickly repairing his body, along with Judson, Fuxi, and the snake goddess quietly watched the scene unfold before their eyes, without any intention of interfering. They knew their presence wouldn't make much of a difference in this battle. What confused the Grand Master of Heaven was that after breaking the light columns, Zen could have just moved forward to attack him. If he were caught by Zen's tentacles, he would definitely die. However, Zen was pressing forward very slowly. What was he up to? While the Grand Master of Heaven was lost in thought and trying to understand what was going on, a thin line was floating in the void behind him. When he finally approached the thin line unwittingly, a mass of tentacles appeared out of nowhere and swallowed him. Chapter 3518, My Will. These particular tentacles came from the one that had been cut off by the Grand Master of Heaven. The ancestry-level bloodline refused to be divided, and even the ones that were divided were very eager to return. However, just this one time, the ancestry-level bloodline allowed this individual to stay apart, hide in space, and continue to reproduce on its own. As Zen broke the light columns one after another, the hidden tentacles gained his experience, and the suckers on their surfaces began adjusting. Just when the Grand Master of Heaven, who had transformed into the Sanskrit light body, was close enough to the tentacles, they attempted to swallow him whole in one gulp. They were like a greedy serpent that wanted to devour its prey in one go. The suckers of the tentacles aggressively absorbed the great Sanskrit light while he was desperately struggling. Splat! The Grand Master of Heaven managed to thrust his white sword into many tentacles. The sword pierced so deep that only half of the blade remained exposed. However, the lower half of the sword quickly turned black and was completely corroded. In an instant, the sword broke, and the exposed half was sucked into the tentacles. On the surface of the Grand Master of Heaven's body, there were hundreds of visible black dots. From there, the power of the foundation was gradually absorbed, and his strength grew weaker and weaker. In the beginning, he could still tear the tentacles at will, but as time passed by, he lost his strength to resist against them. His entire body was now wrapped around by the tentacles, and the great Sanskrit light contained within his body was being extinguished rapidly. However, the Grand Master of Heaven was still showing tenacity and was unwilling to give up. He gathered all his remaining strength and rushed forward in an attempt to break free. When he realized that there was no chance to escape, he desperately stretched out his hand until a finger was exposed outside of the tentacles. Whoosh! A ray of light shot from his fingertip just before his body was completely devoured by the tentacles. Then, the light from the Grand Master of Heaven's finger condensed in the sky and transformed into his appearance. However, the avatar formed was so dim, like the light from a candle that was about to die. His body was almost transparent, and the energy in his body was so weak that it was almost negligible. Zen didn't bother to kill the avatar because he knew that he would also disintegrate in no time. So, He just took the opportunity and asked, "Is this the power of the Foundation?" "Yes," the avatar replied. He stared at Zen with a complicated expression in his eyes. At the back of his mind, he had never thought that he would be defeated. He even used the power of the Foundation to its fullest. "I see. It's very weak then," Zen remarked as he shrugged his shoulders. Upon hearing this, the Grand Master of Heaven was rendered speechless. He just stood frozen, and he had the expression on his face that wanted to confirm if he heard Zen's statement correctly. Even the real Fuxi and his avatar that was hiding in his body were also shocked. They couldn't help but smirk, thinking that this guy was actually more arrogant than them. "What did you just say? You called the power of the Foundation weak?" The Grand Master of Heaven, who had been depressed, was suddenly filled with rage. Consequently, the rate at which his body dissipated also increased. "Yeah, did you not hear that clearly? Your power is weak, that's why you're going to die now," Zen said as he let out a faint smirk. "What? Ha ha, you've got guts, huh?" The Grand Master of Heaven laughed so hard as if he had heard the funniest joke in his life. "I expect you to go to the Three Purities stage one day. Let's meet again, I will wait for you there." The voice of the Grand Master of Heaven became softer and softer until it was inaudible. Soon after, his entire body completely vanished. As Zen stared in the void for a while, he suddenly remembered something when he sensed several intermittent space fluctuations in the distance. "Wow, they run so fast," Zen said as he shook his head. After the Grand Master of Heaven activated his Sanskrit light body, not one member of the Black Ship joined the fray. Perhaps, the Grand Master of Heaven and the Black Ship had communicated secretly that they needed to flee as soon as they saw that he was at a disadvantage. In the battle earlier, the Eternal Realm Masters and the Chaos Ancient Gods focused all their attention on the Grand Master of Heaven. They didn't expect that the Black Ship would use that opportunity to escape. The members of the Black Ship knew that no one pursued them, but they were still in distress. Although no one could see the captain's expression, everyone felt his gloomy and miserable aura. Zen could actually destroy the Grand Master of Heaven's Sanskrit light body. His strength cannot be underestimated anymore. The captain uttered to himself. Not long ago, the captain had only treated Zen as his junior. But in just a short time, Zen was able to surpass and even kill the person that he looked up to. The Grand Master of Heaven was the leader of the Nihility race. Furthermore, he was known for his outstanding strength on the other shore. "What are you talking about? That's not even his own power," Shira said, shaking her head as if unwilling to accept the fact that the Grand Master of Heaven fell in the hands of Zen. "Even so, it's a power that he can use. What difference does that make?" the captain answered. The Grand Master of Heaven must have been too careless. "He didn't expect that Zen would be that strong," said a member of the Black Ship. The way that Zen's strange body continuously adapted and evolved was way beyond the imagination of people with ordinary bloodlines. Even for Eternal Realm warriors, that kind of strength was unconventional. Ha ha, as most of the members of the Black Ship were feeling depressed, the evil god burst out laughing. Shira quickly turned around and gave him a sharp gaze. "What are you laughing at?" Then, the corners of the evil god's mouth curled up. "It's so simple, the Grand Master of Heaven is weaker than Zen. Why are you still justifying him? It's ridiculous." Crash. As soon as the evil god finished speaking, he suddenly felt a fist smashing on his face. The evil god instantly flew and crashed on the deck of the Black Ship. A huge hole was created where he landed. It was the brass man who punched him. His fist remained clenched, and the cold look in his eyes could turn water into ice. Actually, if he didn't make the move, other people on the Black Ship would have taken the initiative. The look in their eyes was clearly screaming that no one could speak ill of the Grand Master of Heaven. The evil god slowly crawled out of the hole, still wearing a smug look on his face. "What, did I say something wrong? Ha ha, why would you even defend the reputation of someone who failed because of his weakness?" He wasn't apologetic at all. As the brass man heard his impious laughter, his rage started contorting his face. Thump, 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 his heavy body ran wildly on the deck and rushed towards the evil god. Holes and cracks were appearing as he passed by the deck. The evil god's laughter became more intense just before the brass man approached him. The other members of the Black Ship were also hopeful that the brass man would shut the evil god's mouth and teach him a lesson. However, their hearts began throbbing when the evil god shouted, "Kneel!" Swoosh! A strong will instantly descended from above. It wasn't just any ordinary will. Its power was beyond words. Crash! Boom! Under the excessive pressure of the surging will, the aggressive brass man froze and knelt before the evil god. "Evil god, do you have a death wish?" Dare to make one false move, and we'll be sure that you regret it. Don't be an idiot. As soon as the members of the black ship saw that the brass man was being utterly humiliated, they started yelling with angry faces. With just a single order from their captain, they were ready to take the evil god down. However, the captain stayed silent and looked up. From where he stood, he could see the enormous outer wall of the source world above them, from where the tremendous will had just come. Tell me, is that the will of the source world? The captain asked straightforwardly. No, the evil god replied with a confident sneer. It's my will. Chapter 3519, The New Captain. The evil god had tried to communicate with the source world all this time. He could faintly sense the will of the source world, but was unable to grasp it. The members of the black ship did not participate in the battle with the Pear Hill. The evil god had studied his own abilities all the time. The opportunity had appeared after he had left the source world. The will of the source world, which had once tried to dodge the evil god, seemed to want him to stay in the source world. If the source world were considered a living being or a person, it wouldn't want its own evil will to leave. This was because Usman had originally been a part of the source world and the evil god had devoured him. The evil god had also been a part of Zen before, and Zen had had to think twice before letting the evil god leave. When the Grand Master of Heaven had fought the people of the Pear Hill outside the source world, the evil god seized this opportunity and quickly connected with the source world. The evil god felt that the source world was a vast and powerful will. He saw it as a living being, born with the birth of one round of chaos. When the evil god's consciousness had merged with this vast will, he was like a tiger that had broken into a flock of sheep. There were millions and millions of sheep, but they were no match for the tiger. It was easy for the evil god to pollute the will of the entire source world and become its ruler. How did you make it? The captain of the black ship asked. Usman had lived for a longer time and had been stronger than the evil god at the time. However, he hadn't been able to fuse with the will of the source world. The black ship had allowed the evil god to merge with Usman, because they wanted him to replace Usman and control the source world. This thought was, however, impractical. Some of the key steps were like mysteries that could not be solved. They needed the Nihility race to join hands with the black ship in order to slowly explore them. Everyone knew that it was impossible to achieve overnight. But the evil god had completed the task pretty easily, after having devoured Usman a few days ago. This is not the tone you should be talking to me in, the evil god said rather arrogantly. He stood up a little taller, while the captain looked minuscule before him. His condescending manner angered all the members of the black ship, including Shira. You brat, what kind of a tone do you think we should use? The brass man shouted, trembling as he struggled to stand up. The deck under his feet creaked. It was not easy to resist the pressure of the source world's will. Ha ha, the evil god merely sneered contemptuously. Boom, the deck under the brass man's feet broke and he was pressed into the ship's cabin. Nobody could tolerate the evil god, seeing as he was bullying others so ruthlessly. Even Shira's eyes glimmered dangerously. When all of them took out the other shore tokens, the captain raised one hand, making a gesture to stop them. He then bowed to the evil god. Captain, what are you doing, Captain? This guy is so ungrateful. The members of the black ship exploded in indignation as they watched the captain they had admired and respected bow to the evil god. The captain said, the reason why the Nihility race supports our black ship is because they want to have a stronger power in the chaos. And it looks like we haven't done a good job. The battle between the Finale Way and the Purge Way was a combat among the Chaos Ancient Gods. The black ship could only let the Grand Master of Heaven join the fight. The members of the black ship, led by the captain, weren't even qualified to watch. The black ship should be led by someone who is immensely powerful. From now on, I am no longer the captain of the black ship. He is the new captain, the captain said to the members of the black ship as he bowed once again to the evil god. I will pass this decision to the Grand Master of Heaven. Are you satisfied? The captain's decision to abdicate pushed the members of the black ship into a deeper shock than they could have imagined. The captain had never changed ever since the black ship was born. Captain, please don't. Captain, how can you let this man rule the black ship? The members of the black ship had never trusted the evil god. Apart from Shira, most of them disliked the evil god. They were on guard against him because of what had happened to Usman. The members of the black ship might not be willing to obey the evil god if he became the captain. The captain turned a deaf ear to the complaints. He merely stared at the evil god. Okay, evil god said, shrugging, and then turned around to enter the cabin. Before he went in, he turned around and said, when the Grand Master of Heaven is revived, ask him to see me as soon as possible. Saying thus, the evil god got into the cabin, leaving a wave of fierce wrath roiling among the members. The brass man, who had climbed up from the bottom of the cabin, asked, his eyes red, "Why would you do something like this, Captain? Even if you let him fulfill his wish, he won't be on our side." Another member said, "It's my fault, letting him join the black ship," Shira said bitterly, her eyes pained. It looked like she had brought trouble to the black ship. After all the members had vented their anger, the captain said slowly, "Are you all done?" The members stared at the captain. They had nothing to say but to denounce the evil god. Both the evil god and Usman, as the incarnation of the evil will, are destined not to submit to anyone, the captain said, his gaze fixed on the brass man. "Usman, evil god, the Grand Master of Heaven, and I are very clear about this. Then why did you still cultivate him? Why do you let him act so willfully?" the brass man asked, confused. The captain smiled and replied, "Remember the mission of our black ship. Our goal is not to create or survive, but to destroy." The Nihility race didn't care whether or not the evil god was loyal. As an incarnation of the evil will, he was born for destruction. This destruction came from his evil nature, which was different from the reasons behind the Nihility way, but they had the same goal and that was enough. The captain then went back to his cabin, leaving the members standing on the deck. A crack passed through the Taoism province. It was hundreds of millions of miles long and looked dangerous. The fatal chaotic energy had already deadened the Taoism province. The boundary wall between the Taoism province and the Pear Hill was damaged. A crack, hundreds of feet wide, now decorated the boundary wall, chaotic energy spreading slowly through it. All the creatures in a radius of dozens of miles around the crack had retreated to safety. This was quickly reported. Before the chaotic energy spread out completely, a mountain leader appeared, carrying a mountain, and placed it into the crack in the boundary wall. This was only temporary. The Pear Hill would find a way to repair the wall in the future. While the Pear Hill was coping with the aftermath of the disaster, Zen, Fuxi, the snake goddess, Eastern Emperor Tai, and the two Chaos Ancient Gods finally returned safely. When these huge masters appeared in the Pear Hill, it caused great excitement and cheer among the people there. They had won the final victory in the eyes of the members and disciples of the Pear Hill. But Zen, Fuxi, and the snake goddess knew that this war was only the beginning. The real test was still ahead and it was going to be anything but easy. Chapter 3520, Restored. The Battle of the Pear Hill had shocked the source world. There was an old belief that the other shore always had an impact on the chaos. For instance, both the Nihility race and the Element Spirit race supported some powerful races in the chaos. However, their strategies were always subtle. The power of the other shore had never been directly exerted on the chaos. The chaos had always been governed by the lucky Chaos Ancient Gods and the ruling forces. But this time, the tables had turned, the rules had undergone a fundamental change. The Grand Master of Heaven of the Nihility race had personally descended into the chaos, and Claire of the Element Spirit civilization had also participated in the battle. They were existences that could not only defeat but also put the Chaos Ancient Gods to their death. The insurmountable wall between the other shore and the chaos had been torn down. Warriors at the eternal realm of superpowers and the top 10 ferocious beasts of the chaos had once been considered powerhouses for dominating a part in the chaos. However, when compared to the powerful warriors of the other shore, they were no match. They had inferior strength incomparable to theirs. The attitude of some super forces such as the Separate Abyss race had always been ambiguous. They would not choose side until one of the Purge Way and the Finale Way clearly gained the upper hand. In the Battle of the Pear Hill, Claire was defeated and the Chaos Ancient Gods, Herbert, and Lamont had unfortunately died. The Bering race, which appeared to be extremely powerful, faced a crushing failure. The Pear Hill destroyed the two Chaos Ancient Gods, and on top of that, they had killed the Grand Master of Heaven behind the Black Ship. Many of the ruling civilizations reacted quickly even as they were still in a state of shock. These Eternal Realm warriors were only opportunists, but as the main force that supported the Finale Way, the Pear Hill had to fight against the joined forces of the Element Spirit civilization and the Nihility race. There was no point in refusing these super forces that willingly crossed over to their side. It was unrealistic to expect these forces to help them fight against the Nihility race and the Element Spirit civilization, yet it was enough that they would not fight the Pear Hill. Not long after Zen and the others returned to the Pear Hill, Kendrick also arrived. He was the third Chaos Ancient God that supported the Finale Way. He was a creature that resembled a black turtle, his movements were considered slowest among the 6 Chaos Ancient Gods. When he had finally reached the chaos, the war had already ended. Among the 6 Chaos Ancient Gods, Othniel mastered the truth about space, Gerald the truth about life, Herbert the truth about confinement, Lamont the truth about temperature, and Judson the truth about creation. The truth that Kendrick, the last one of them, grasped was defense. Compared to the first 5 Chaos Ancient Gods, Kendrick's attacking power was not too strong, but his defending power was extraordinary among them. After Kendrick descended to the Pear Hill, he directly entered its inner space. His entire body integrated with the Pear Hill, forming the strongest defensive line for it. All over the Pear Hill, from the snake goddess to the mountain leaders, the common members, and the disciples, all proceeded to work, busying themselves in building up the defense. No one knew when the next war would break out. They didn't want to be taken by surprise, or be caught unprepared. They could only try their best to contribute to strengthening the Pear Hill. After returning to the Pear Hill, Zen didn't go to see Yan and his family immediately. Instead, he chose to stay secluded. He glanced at a mirror only to be terrified at the sight. The ancestry-level bloodline had transformed his body, almost turning him into a hideous monster. Tentacles had grown all over his body and his head was unimaginably horrible. Anyone who faced such a monster would certainly be frightened. I have to return to my original appearance, he urged himself. On the dark haze peak, there was also a young man dressed in cotton robe, together with Zen. This young man was number 9527 who had just obtained its freedom. However, Gerald was someone who would never set a soul fragment free. Normally, a soul fragment like number 9527 who had formed the consciousness of its own would be retrieved by Gerald himself. But this time, he made an exception. He not only allowed number 9527 to leave freely but also created a human body for it. For number 9527, the only person in this world it had a connection with was Zen. Naturally, it chose to follow Zen. You look mighty with your new look, number 9527 said with a smile. And in this form, your strength should be more powerful, he presumed. That's true, but this appearance makes me no longer a human. Zen answered, shaking his head. The tentacles on his body could not only absorb the great Sanskrit light, but they were also capable of acquiring other energy. If the snake goddess fought with Zen now, it wouldn't even take a second round for Zen to completely absorb the shadow of snake goddess. Just one round would be enough. As number 9527 said, the combat strength he had in this form appeared to surpass that of his original form. It doesn't matter whether you are a human or not, number 9527 replied. As a soul fragment of Gerald, number 9527 had a unique perspective of life. In his opinion, it was not important to maintain the human form. Then why did you take that human form? Asked Zen with a smile. Number 9527 was stunned upon hearing his question. After staying with Zen for a long time, number 9527 began to better understand the human race. Moreover, he wanted to follow Zen, so he was naturally willing to have a human form. Zen said no more and once again tried to communicate with the ancestry-level bloodline. It was certain that the ancestry-level bloodline already had its consciousness, but Zen was unable to tell the level of this consciousness it had reached. Did it rely on its instinct to act, or did it have a mind of its own? There was a huge difference between the two. Zen continued to try to communicate with it. His constant persistence from morning until evening had worked. The ancestry-level bloodline finally responded and spared Zen. 2 days later, there was a transformation in Zen's physical body. The tentacles on his body quickly degenerated, his old body and limbs grew out again, forming his normal state. Seeing that there was a thin net draped on the surface of his body, Zen could only smile bitterly. The ancestry-level bloodline had memories, and it was still afraid that Zen would let out the blood. That was why it left the net on his body. Now that his physical body had been restored, Zen was relieved. After he sent the news to the snake goddess, she immediately told him that someone wanted to see him. Zen rushed over and was surprised to see that there were already over 300 people gathered in the hall. Sally and Hutton were among them. He squinted his eyes and recognized the old man in the lead. It was Ambrose. Sally, Hutton, and several others of the Nine Li race had followed Zen and stayed in the Flow Sword sect. The Oneness Sky Palace had moved to the west, and they also entered the Pear Hill with the disciples of the Flow Sword sect. Grandpa Ambrose. Zen's eyes lit up with excitement as he approached. Ambrose nodded at Zen with a relieved smile on his wrinkled face. Beside Ambrose, a skinny middle-aged man stared at Zen with tearful eyes. I didn't expect that our Nine Li race would have a chance and that such a character belonged to us. Hearing what this person said, Zen looked at him from head to toe. This person's aura was extraordinary and he was at the Holy Soul realm. Zen looked at Ambrose with confused eyes, as if asking who the unfamiliar man was. Ambrose cleared his throat and introduced, "This is Tucker, the little brother of Grand Chieftain and I. He is the only powerful warrior that remained in the 9 Li race." Among the 9 chiefs, Tucker Li was the only warrior at the Holy Soul realm that had survived. There were several branches of the remaining members of the 9 Li race. The group led by Tucker Li and the one led by Ambrose didn't know about each other's existence. Not long ago, Tucker Li finally found this other branch. After knowing what had happened in the Oneness Sky Palace and the Pear Hill, Tucker Li decisively rushed to the Pear Hill with all the remaining members from his group.